excited. I hope you all are too. We have some really good panelists today. Just so you know how it's going to go, we have 3 panels. Each are going to be about an hour long. This first one's going to be a little bit longer. We'll do 10-minute breaks in between. So, you know, if you need to come and go, I know people have classes. Feel free to do that. Just and then we're going to try to leave some time at the end of each panel for questions. So just hold them until that. And with that said, I'm a terrible public speaker. And I'm going to hand it over to our panelists to introduce themselves. So thank you.
All right, can you all hear me? Yeah. Hi everyone, my name is Taylor Brown. I'm a staff attorney at Lambda Legal in our Atlanta office. I imagine a lot of you are interested in the law and are law students. So my main substantive areas I'm interested in is employment law, healthcare, and education. I'm lead counsel in Cato v. Falwell, which is our newly launched case challenging the exclusion of transition-related healthcare in the North Carolina State Employee Health Plan. I'm also on a similar case versus the state of Alaska. And what else? I do a whole bunch of other stuff. But yes, I'm mainly focused on trans rights, and I'm especially interested in trans rights myself.
Hello, my name is Monica Helms, and I'm not a lawyer, and I don't play one on TV. So I am noted for creating the transgender pride flag. And this year is its 20th anniversary, so I'm real happy about that. And I have been involved in many things over the last 20 years of my transitioning time. I created the Transgender American Veterans Association. They fought for having veterans treated equally in the VA, and after 8.5 years after the organization was formed, we got that. So that's a pretty good track record. They are now currently fighting for service members, trans service members, and seem to be doing a good job because the ban keeps getting blocked in court. I've lobbied state legislators in Arizona and here and on the Hill multiple times. And I just finished writing my autobiography called More Than Just a Flag, and it's out on Amazon. And I'm real happy to be here because I think there's a lot of issues. Even though I'm not a lawyer, I've seen a lot going on over the last 22 years, and so hopefully I'll be able to answer some questions that you may have.
I'm Harris Mason. I'm the Superior Court Law Clerk for the Alapaha Circuit. I graduated from Georgia Law last year. I was the first openly transgender male to graduate from Georgia, so I'm really excited about that. I use he, him, his pronouns, and that's it for now.
So this first panel is sort of a one-on-one, and I think as comfortable as everyone is, we can talk about our transition. I think it's some aspects of our transition. I always come to these things with the idea that people are new, they may not know trans people, and so I think covering some of this basic one-on-one terminology and concepts can be helpful. So we'll start. I'll go through the slides, and then you all please chime in where you think appropriate. Okay, I wish I could pretend I could read that. Okay. Oh, okay. Okay. So what percentage of the population identifies as transgender? As of 2016, 0.06. So a pretty small percentage of the population compared to other, I guess, classifications in terms of sexuality or race and ethnicity.
And I think that figure is incorrect, mainly because the way they got the information was through insurance, and not all states participated in this. So in fact, Georgia ended up having the fourth highest percentage of trans people in the population and the fifth largest population in the country. But I think that may not be correct.
Yeah, and historically, transgender people have been excluded. As we know, during the Trump administration, they have ordered for this upcoming census that they're not going to ask about a lot of different things. They told the CDC they can't speak about or use the word transgender in any of their reporting. And so when we're gathering statistics and other information that we use to either support policy work or support law, the stats are just not there, and so it's a huge gap. But there are a lot of great organizations that work on that, a lot of them based out of DC, like the National Center for Transgender Equality, Georgia Equality here in Georgia. They do a lot of great work as well in terms of just data collection and statistics that we need. And also, I'll say that in terms of reporting yourself as transgender or even answering those things, yeah, it probably is definitely skewed because people just oftentimes don't feel safe reporting that kind of information or how to relate to their job or their healthcare or their safety. So there's probably a lot of us. Oh, no.
You
Okay.
didn't read that?
Yeah, I was going to say. Okay, so back to the basics. So an understanding, I guess, like what it means to be transgender. These are just some of, I guess, like the buzzwords or the major concepts as we sort of convey our experience to the broader world, especially in the legal setting. So we always start out with sex. So sex is the biological component that we're talking about, and so this can be a combination of genitalia, chromosomes, and hormonal makeup. And again, sex is usually assigned at birth, and it's based on what a doctor sees. So they're not taking into account these other factors like gender expression and gender identity. And yeah, so either they assign you male, female, or some kind of intersex condition. As compared to gender identity. So gender identity, so this refers to the internal sense of being male, female, or not identified with a gender at all, or identified with multiple genders. And so this is sort of the hallmark for trans people. Our gender identity doesn't necessarily match our sex, and this means like primary and secondary sexual characteristics. So that's anything used for reproduction. And then that also goes to some of the more like arguably biological differences between males and females that we see stereotypically, and that includes like height and hair growth patterns, body fat distribution, muscle mass, all of those things that we sort of use or that we've gendered in society to distinguish between males and females. And so, yeah, so for trans people, again, there's that mismatch in a sense. We don't necessarily identify with what we've been assigned.
I guess just to add, I think we should think about how we define biological, because as we learn more about gender identity, I understand Harvard has at least one study talking about how trans people before hormone treatment, there's something about their brains that's more like the gender that they identify as than what they've been assigned. So I'm really cautious about saying that gender identity isn't biological, because we need to know more. And I think the point that y'all should remember is that we have all of these sex characteristics, but when they don't all point to the either male or female, then it's really the gender identity that matters.
Yeah, and I think that just goes like, you just don't necessarily know when you see someone how they identify. I think that's the key. And again, exactly what Harris said, in terms of those studies, it just goes, again, underfunding. This kind of money isn't funneled to research studies that further this kind of information, even though it's extremely important. There are great studies coming out of Harvard and some out of Europe that are focusing on like brain scans and brain patterns to try to see sort of, either depict gender dysphoria or what's going on in people's mind when they're experiencing gender dysphoria, or distinguishing factors. And then also just, differences in trans people's brains as compared to the general population.
Also, it's important that if you meet a trans individual, then it is polite to ask how they identify. Like he mentioned the fact that he likes male pronouns. And I don't, after being this way for 22 years, I don't really say how I identify it's sort of like if you don't figure it out, then that's your problem. But I think that it is polite to ask if you have any doubt, and so make sure that you are polite to the trans person.
And that goes to gender expression, and that's sort of how we express our gender identities. And this goes to, again, a lot of stereotypes, but I guess they're useful in this context as we distinguish between men and women. So that's like hairstyles, use of makeup, clothing that has been gendered, to just sort of express how you feel internally or how you want to express yourself. I don't think, that, you have to, you can definitely identify as a man and have long hair. That's not a problem. But yeah, it's been helpful. And then most importantly is gender attribution. So this is what other people attribute to you, or sort of how they identify you and how they interact with you. And so that means, if you're a Starbucks and they say, here's your coffee miss, they attribute you to a woman or identify you as a woman. And that tends to be the biggest problem for trans people, is being misgendered, because people are, again, coming from this framework that they learn through media, through being raised in a certain way, what have you, that men look this way, women look this way, and I get to assign you a gender. And so a lot of the work that we focus on, or trans people, I should say in my case, just like getting access to healthcare, is to sort of fix this alignment so that trans people can live more authentically and live in a manner where they are perceived and are able to live as themselves.
During the time I was starting to write my book, I came to a conclusion about myself that I'm not necessarily female, I'm not necessarily male, but I call myself an amalgamated person. Those of you who know what amalgamation is, that's a mixture of, in metallurgy, it's a mixture of two metals to make the metal stronger, but they don't chemically mix. So I feel that my genders are amalgamated, which has created, in my opinion, a stronger person.
I agree. Most trans people I know, are incredibly strong and incredibly resilient. So I think that's maybe a trait. So gender identities exist on a spectrum. And again, so gender identity is just in relation to how, feminine or masculine, or again, some combination of the two, people identify. And so I think we really have to work down breaking stereotypes on what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a man, and especially in terms of what it means to, look like a woman or look like a man. And again, so you can kind of see the spectrum. I'm not going to sort of read all of them out, but you sort of get the idea. Oh, and I forgot. So one last thing from that last slide was sexual orientation. I believe that was on this slide. So I always say, trans people, we shot ourselves in the foot when we joined the LGBT movement, like LGBT, because LG and B all deal with sexual orientation. And, so I think people naturally assume when they hear LGBT, we're just one big family, one big group, and we're all dealing with the same thing. But sexual orientation is, that's who you're attracted to sexually, or who you have romantic feelings for, versus someone's identity, which is completely separate and sort of self-involved. That's, something internal. And so trans people can identify as heterosexual, homosexual, bisexual, the whole host of sexualities. So they are two completely important separate identities, but a lot of the case law that we've developed, especially around sexual orientation, has been extremely helpful in some ways in our advocacy for trans rights. And kind of vice versa, I guess, because I actually believe there were, especially in the Title VII context, there were definitely some trans status wins before there was sexual orientation, like back in the 60s and 70s, I believe. And also, if there are any questions while we're going over this, please ask. I think that's always the best way to learn, in case I'm not covering something. Oh, sexuality. Okay, well, I was ahead of myself. And so sexuality, we're learning, more and more about that. That's still very much a struggle in a lot of areas of civil rights in terms of discrimination against lesbian women, gay men, and bisexual people. It also is something that is on a spectrum for a lot of people.
Essentially, sexual orientation is given to you by the public. See, I started off as a a heterosexual male. And after I transitioned, I still liked women, so society now calls me a lesbian. So, you know, my sexual orientation it changed only in the terminology. It didn't change who I felt attracted to.
And yeah, there's arguments for and against terminology. I think it's helpful in a sense when we're trying to argue discrimination because there always has to be in a sense a comparator. Who are we comparing it to the majority? And so again, labels oftentimes, especially in the trans context, don't mean anything for a lot of trans people because we live our lives as who we are, and it's just society that's trying to put us in boxes or trying to figure things out, usually so they can discriminate against us. It's just always fun. Agender, so this is what I'm talking about, people who don't identify as male or female. And again, there's lots of different words for this. I encounter a new word every day. And so I'm sure I probably cannot give you a complete list. But again, these are people who don't necessarily identify with any of the stereotypes or any of those things that we typically associate with being a man or a woman. And oftentimes they're people who are perceived as, either just flat out gender nonconforming, androgynous maybe, people who you just can't readily identify in your mind. But again, it goes to how they identify. I think that's what's key. And as we, if you were to approach someone, you were not sure of their gender or how they identify, it's best to just not assign them one at all and use just like they, them pronouns. I think that's extremely helpful because then you're just not gendering the situation or just using their name instead of saying, you see someone named Sally, Sally looks androgynous to you, you don't really know if Sally identifies as male or female. Your waiter comes up and it's like, do you want some water? And you say, well, they want some water. Instead of Sally wants some water, or she wants some water, you would say they want some water. I think that's really helpful. It's really, when I try to give this explanation to, and usually I have like more examples that I think are more helpful. But once you get into the habit of doing it, it's just such an easy thing to do and such a respectful thing to do, and that way, like, you're really just not offending anyone if you're offending. And I just think language is so important, as we know in the law, but also just interacting with trans people, and so I think knowing these things is important. Do either of y'all want to cover intersex? I realize I'm talking again, so I was assigned moderator, another assignment, and so intersex again. So these are this is intersex condition, as sometimes it's pathologized, but this is a situation where people are born with stereotypically male or female sexual characteristics, and this again. So primary sexual characteristics are anything involving reproduction, and then the secondary sexual characteristics are those things that, again, we just typically associate with men and women. And so for a lot of intersex people, we have a great case, which actually we just got a great ruling on. So this is Zim v. whoever, honestly, it's like a rotating circus these days. Whoever is the Secretary of Secretary of State, yeah. Whoever is the Secretary of State, Zim be that person. So Dana Zim is an intersex person, was assigned male at birth, and ultimately grew up, identified as female, and transitioned. Identified as female at first, but then ultimately came to identify as non-binary and gender non-conforming, and didn't identify with male or female. So when Dana went to apply for a passport, whenever you fill out the application, you have to give all of your demographic information, which includes male or female. Dana didn't identify as male or female, and so didn't select either, and submitted their passport application, and the passport application was denied. And so, of course, if Dana was ever Dana can't leave the country because they don't have a passport, and if they were ever outside of the country, they wouldn't be able to get back into the country. So, of course, this invokes a lot of liberty interest. And so we just successfully, this case has been going on. When I started at Lambda Legal when I was in law school as an intern, and I think that was like 2014, 2015. And That's when that case was launched, I think, and we just got a district court ruling that says that the passport office has to issue Dana a passport with an ex-gender worker. So of course, this is only in the district court, so we'll see what happens, especially these days. But it's a good step, and this is, many states are already going towards this for people who do want non-binary gender markers. This is a thing in other countries as well, so it's not necessarily, the U.S. tends to be behind on civil rights in general, across the spectrum on multiple levels. But it's extremely important for a lot of reasons, again, not just those, we want to respect people and how they identify and recognize gender variance and sexuality variance and all those things. But again, this is someone's identity documents that the government is issuing and classifying them as. And they have to use these to apply for health insurance, travel, all of those things. And so it's important that they be accurate and reflect who people are.
And with intersex, it could be their genes. The American Medical Association recognizes 14 different combinations of X and Y, or lack of one or the other, as a sex gene. So when they say, when states say that it's you got to be XX, you're going to be XX or XY, that what about all those wonderful people in between? There are female-bodied individuals who have XY chromosomes. There are male-bodied individuals who have XX chromosomes. There are all different kinds of combinations. Then there's those people that were born with genitalia that's not correct, doesn't have a specific appearance. And there's individuals who are both born with male genitalia and female genitalia. So there's all kinds of combinations. As far as what the population, there's a 1 in 500 chance that somebody is intersex. So there could be a couple of you in here.
Yeah, because it's not necessarily genitalia. It's like chromosomal things that you're just not going to know unless you have some kind of test. And we see, there was a practice with intersex children where doctors actually just chose their sex, and oftentimes it was male, and then when puberty, like the time for puberty came, the doctors would then prescribe hormones that would give that child like a natural male puberty. And just without consulting the parents at all oftentimes, or framing it in a way that, I'm the doctor, I'm authoritative, without giving these parents a choice, which had huge ramifications for people later down the road who then have to go through transitioning, which it can be, it often is very, very difficult and often very expensive, especially post-puberty.
The American Pediatric Association has finally come out and said that anybody with ambiguous genitalia they will not assign a sex to this individual, and let the child grow up and decide on himself. And most parents these days are very progressive and understanding, so they'll go along with that. Most parents.
And I think it goes to the argument that sex isn't just about genitalia. It's like we're going to decide later down the road, as the child has grown up and developed and can express who they are and who they feel themselves to be, that's when it's time. You can't always just base it on genitals.
Yes. Move on.
Another thing I think is important is, again, going back to that whole idea of we have to create these categories to explain ourselves and to explain our experience. Everyone has a gender identity, so all of you, I'm going to assume for the most part, a lot of you probably identify as cisgender, and so that's when there is, your sex assigned at birth and your gender identity are harmonious, you don't have any problems, and your life is just perfect.
Yeah, right. Been there, didn't do that.
And then, of course, we talked about being transgender. Okay. So transitioning. So I think we always think of transitioning as 3 different things: legal, social, and medical. So social transition is, that's when someone's changing their gender expression. telling you, giving you their correct name or their correct pronouns and how they want to be addressed. Legal transition is the changing of government issued identification documents, or I guess administrative issued identification documents, so driver's license, passports, social security cards, all of those things that, again, for a lot of practical reasons, play extremely important roles in people's lives. And then medical transition. So that's the use of hormones, sometimes fewer use of suppressants, and gender confirmation surgeries to sort of bring those secondary and primary sexual characteristics in alignment with someone's gender identity.
I was in a PFLAG meeting Sunday, and something came up about having your birth certificate changed, and we weren't sure. There was some discussion and some discretion on whether in Georgia it is required that you have gender
Confirmation surgery?
yes, or if you had to have the surgery, or if you could just start on the hormones. We weren't sure what the answer was there for Georgia, because I understand it's different in different states.
Yeah,
What is it in Georgia?
well, in Georgia, yeah, they are a little on the strict side. Every state has their own requirements. Some are very good, some are not so good. But the thing is that they have to see a letter from a physician saying that this person has done the proper surgery. And for trans men, that can be a little more difficult, mainly because most trans men don't get bottom surgery. So sometimes the doctor that they go to for top surgery can be the individual, be the doctor that writes the correct letter, and then the state goes along with it. It's amazing what the state will accept. So you just have to have it worded correctly, and most doctors that are involved with trans people understand this. So you know, you can get away with for a trans woman, you could in some cases get away with having your documents changed without bottom surgery. And I'm a case in point in that. So I presented the correct letter, and they accepted it. Gave me an F on the driver's license. But I was born in South Carolina, and sadly South Carolina's rules are that they will amend the birth certificate, but the amendment is right there on the birth certificate. So it's like, who gives a damn? But, you know, they kind of really screw you over. And I found in my life I've really had to need a birth certificate for anything, so I'm pretty cool with that. You know, hey, fine, you guys be jerks and I'll live my life.
So I haven't looked at it in a while, but as I recall, in Georgia, you need a court order to change your birth certificate. You'll need to, I think you need a name change, is that right, as well, Chanel, too?
So it's one or the other. It's either a court order or a confirmation from a doctor that you have had gender transitioning surgery.
Okay.
So that's pretty broad.
Right.
But it's one or the other. It's the same thing with the name change. It's you need a court for that, but for the surgery, it's one or the other.
Yeah.
And the doctor says that, hey, you got the change. And they're going, oh, okay. Because these people aren't doctors, and they don't pretty much, you know, they got to do their work. They try to get through it as quickly as possible, so they're going to be okay with what they see. You presented the correct documentation. So they're cool with that.
By statute, it does say sex reassignment surgery, which typically means bottom surgery. And again, this rules out a whole host of people, including transgender youth, who again are living more openly, are being supported by their parents, and may need birth certificates for schools. This is for, again, people who can't afford surgery, people who don't want surgery, people who are ineligible for surgery because of health reasons. Yeah, technically by statute there is a sex reassignment surgery requirement. But I will say, so Lambda Legal, we challenged our focus has been on states that have outright exclusions. You can never change a birth certificate. And so we've had cases where we're about to launch a case in Tennessee, Ohio, Kansas, and a few other states. Idaho. No, I work, our work better than I and yeah, so those are states that had, just by statute, you cannot amend it.
And Texas is kind of iffy too.
Yeah, and so now we're actually looking at states that have these surgery requirements, because again, that is you're no less of a trans person because you haven't had surgery, you have had surgery. That's like sort of a personal choice that is, with the individual and isn't determinative of sort of your status in terms of access to appropriate identity documents. And so,
if it's also a medical reason why you can't have transition surgery, then the state would be discriminating against you based on your disability of sorts. So there is different ways of attacking it, and I've seen various attacks on this situation. You guys, what do you think?
A quick question before you move on. Taylor, I guess 6 weeks ago when I heard you speak, you said that the doctors can word things to the point where you can say that if you're just on hormones, you've been altered to the point. So maybe the wording?
Yeah, as Monica was saying, it is very much like Russian roulette. It's who you get out the window that day, what county you're in.
What person's there?
The law is supposed to be equal. We're supposed to be equally applied to everybody. And so it shouldn't be that way, but unfortunately it is just because of the administrative state that we live in. And so oftentimes that language, this person has undergone treatment that has caused irreversible changes to sex, which technically includes HRT. We've seen that language be used successfully, but ultimately that the state of Georgia either has to change it or they have to be sued in order to just get that sex surgery requirement stricken out of the statute, because it is extremely discriminatory.
When I got my name changed in Phoenix 22 years ago, Arizona had this requirement where you had to have a letter from a psychologist or psychiatrist that said that you have reached the point of no return. And so that was sufficient enough to get the F on the driver's license and all the other things that had to do, because, hey, if you've reached the point of no return, what good is it to try to go back? You can't go back. So that was essentially the way it worked in Arizona. I understand they changed that, though.
Yeah, many states, the logical thing is as you see states get sued and lose, the logical thing to do is not waste taxpayer money defending these kinds of lawsuits and to, just change it. Much like the state of North Carolina, they love this kind of stuff apparently. They love losing, which is not, I've never experienced that. And so, yeah, we get to have a little bit of fun.
I have a question. In regards to the name change, I'm pretty sure this was in Georgia, and I'm not sure it's still on the books or if they just want to enforce it, but wasn't there at a time you had to announce in the paper if you were getting your name changed? Is that still enforced pretty strictly? Because they don't do that in Florida anymore, although it might still be on the books.
Yeah, some of the state statutes have provisions, like in New York, where there's certain conditions where they can waive the publication requirement. And again, this is based on historical issues in terms of when people were changing their names, it was to announce it to, when people actually still read newspapers. And so, in case they were they owed a debt, they were trying to run away from it, or they were just hiding out. Georgia still makes you publish it, and a lot of the people who do those who do name change services, Lambda Legal, and I know Georgia Legal Aid as well. They know newspapers that nobody reads, or these tiny little whatever, and they publish them there. But yeah, you still very much do.
That reminds me that when I was standing in front of the judge to get my name changed, and he asked, "Are you doing this to avoid debt?" And I just laughed to myself and said, "Probably get into more debt."
Yeah, Lambda Legal had a case called Rowan Feldhouse was a trans man, who was in Georgia. His name change was denied by a judge in Georgia, and this judge said basically, I believe that one of the reasons they can deny name changes for fraud, and it's basically that they think that you're trying to commit fraud. And his rationale for the fraud argument was that I think you're fraudulently portraying yourself as a man to the community, and by you change your name, people are going to perceive you as a man or know you as a man, and that's fraud. We won that case. Rowan passed away, unfortunately, from an unrelated, I don't know how name change would be related to death, but for medical reasons. For medical reasons. But yeah, so, and again, a lot of states have those waivers, and judges typically can understand why it could very much be a safety issue to have to publish a name change for that reason in a newspaper. Oh, and yeah, so we sort of talked about that. So again, these are just some of the more social things. Again, these are just social cues that people use to assign you gender that are more easily modifiable as compared to medical intervention. So again, just the typical things, a name change, pronoun changes, and identity documents and appearance. Do's and don'ts. Okay, I actually not reading these, so I do apologize. And we talked about a lot of these as they come in. Not using gendered language is really easy. Like you'll see, a big thing at Lambda Legal that we've really tried to be conscious of, and I think the movement in its entirety is as we're writing complaints, as we are, doing our motions, whatever. We want to make sure that we're using gender-neutral language, and because oftentimes you'll see, even if you look in terms of court opinions that were issued in regards to African American civil rights, like judges were using the N-word and like variations of the N-word to describe Black folks, and so it's like, as we progress in time, we realize we can't use that kind of language, and so we're trying to remove gender language because again, it just confines people in certain boxes, and so just conscious things of that. It's the same thing, just in practical terms, like when we're talking about, I do healthcare is something I'm extremely interested in, and not just legal on the legal side, but also on the practical side. So when I'm talking to healthcare providers about ways they can be more affirming in their practice, it's like having on your intake forms, making sure that you have multiple boxes that people can check in terms of how they identify, making sure you're asking about gender identity, sexual orientation, making sure you're asking about, and this is in the legal context too, like when I was in law school, I came to law school hell on wheels, ready to get what I needed, and one of the first things that I encountered was this whole seating chart thing, where the professor asked around the seating chart, you had to put your name on there. They didn't ask you about pronouns or anything like that. The professor would always say like Mr. or Mrs. Brown, and that's just not necessary, or it's like it could be necessary, I guess, if you want, but you can also just so easy to put a little box on there to say, please call me Mr., please call me Miss, or please don't call me either. Just things like that people don't think about. But it's extremely embarrassing to be misgendered in front of a large class, or in any setting like that, or when you're in the hospital or the doctor's office and the nurse comes out and says, Miss Brown, come back, or Mr. Brown, come back. Like, no one wants to experience that, and it's just so easily fixable.
That's because of gender-neutral names.
But sometimes I think it's just it's a Southern thing too. Like we always want to be polite, and we always want to say Mr. or Mrs. and it's like, no, chill. Don't ask or assume about whether a trans person will have surgery. Yeah, it's just that's another thing too. I think when trans people want to talk about their experience, I think it's extremely powerful. I think it's extremely important. But don't expect every trans person to give their life story. They shouldn't have to. Oftentimes it can be very traumatic for a lot of people. And then there's also just this focus on genitalia. Like it's because I tell you I'm trans, all of a sudden you have this like vested right to know what's in my pants. Like it's very weird. But yeah, and it's just and oftentimes it's not because people are trying to be offensive or they're trying to be ill-mannered or what have you. It's just this, I don't know, it's just this thing. It's just very new to them, and all of a sudden they're just thinking about those kinds of things. And that's like the furthest things from most trans people's mind. Like not, unless we're romantically involved or potentially romantically involved, it's probably none of your business to know those kinds of things.
Yeah, then I've seen in the past where trans celebrities were being interviewed, and the person interviewing them asked about whether they've had surgery or not. And I'm thinking, do they ask that to other people? What does your genitalia look like? You know, ask Tom Cruise to, pull down his pants and show us what he looks like. I mean, jeepers. You don't ask everybody that, so why ask us?
And it's in their mind because that's what makes you a man or a woman in their mind. So it's like, have you had the surgery? And like, because for them, I guess it would be like confirmation that, oh yeah, you're actually a woman now or something. And again, as we know, that's not the case. How to be an everyday ally. Another funny story. So, again, when I got to law school, I got involved in outlaw pretty quickly, and we have like club day, like where we all are in this big room, and all the clubs are there, and all the 1Ls get to come and sign up. And I just remember so many people coming up, so many, I say kids, they weren't kids, they're probably the same age as me, but kids like coming up to me and saying, I want to join as an ally. Like they always had to put that at the end, and I was like, we don't have any more space for allies. Sorry, we're done. But no, it is extremely important. And again, I don't think of this as, it's just manners. It's literally just common sense manners. Everything you learned in Sunday school, all those things. Using correct names and pronouns, don't out people, don't talk about people's trans status, much like it's not appropriate to talk about somebody's sexual orientation. It shouldn't be a topic of conversation that's open for discussion. It's inappropriate.
And it's dangerous too, depending on where you are in the country.
Exactly.
Yeah, and see something, say something. I think it's always difficult to be the person that has to stand up for themselves all the time, that's the situation for trans people. And so I think, if you're knowledgeable about these things and even if that person's out of the room and you hear people discussing things, you have to watch that. You just can't allow these kinds of things to go on. And yeah, again, so we're out of law school. I imagine a lot of you advocates, activists interested in this. And so I think in all areas of work that we do, in all areas of the law, trans status is, it's important in a lot of different ways, especially like even in employment law, in the education sector, all of those things. We always have to be conscious of sort of what we're writing, the rules that we're making, the cases that we're advancing, and sort of how they impact other people, not just transgender people, people of different sexual orientations, people of different races, ethnicities. Just being conscious of those things. Like Harris was giving a great example about this whole abortion. So do you want to talk more about that? Like, I think that's a good example of how, like, when people are trying to pass laws, they don't realize that when they're using broad terms about sex.
Right, so HB 481 is known as the heartbeat bill. If you read it well, there's 3 exceptions. One is for like a medical emergency, but naturally it says medical emergency of either woman or female, and then there's one for if there's an issue with the fetus, and then there's the last one that's for rape or incest, and the rape and incest and the medical emergency both use female terms. So if you're like me and you still have a uterus, but legally you're male, you have an issue. And even with the rape exception, in Georgia, if you're not female, you can't be raped. So even if I am raped in fact, but not in law, and I need an abortion, well, I'm out of luck. So it's really important that we are conscious about gendered language, because chances are you're going to impact a trans person in one way or another, especially when we're thinking about policy and law. So yeah.
And that's literally what we do every day at Lambda Legal, because we are dealing with laws that explicitly did not think about transgender people, explicitly excluded transgender people. And so so I do a lot of Title VII work. So Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, so this is the prohibition of certain types of discrimination by employers of a certain size and to meet other certain requirements. So we use the sex discrimination sex discrimination prohibition in Title VII as applied to transgender people. Now, I love explaining this to judges, but it's actually very commonsensical in a lot of different ways. And so we have to, I mean, it also works as we're broadening our understanding of what sex means, but I think oftentimes it does help to be explicit, when, especially in this new age as we're crafting new policy and legislation. Now, some people, I have some creative arguments, especially about the government, who say that when statutes explicitly enumerate gender identity and gender expression, that clearly shows it's different from sex. You know, sex is over here, and now we have gender identity and gender expression. So, of course, that Congress didn't intend for it to mean sex discrimination. I think that's in the Hate Crimes Act. And there's also some stuff going around against the Violence Against Women Act VAWA in terms of does that protect trans women. The government is really fun sometimes. But yeah, it's extremely important. But we actually do have a lot of good sex discrimination law as applied to trans people, and then we just have to translate it over. So I'm on our appellate team for Adams. So this is Adams v. The School Board of St. Johns County out of Florida. So this case is on appeal in the 11th Circuit right now. And this is about applying Title IX, which is in federally funded educational programs, applying that sex discrimination prohibition for trans students so that they can have access. I mean, not even just, I mean, of course it's about access to appropriate facilities and bathrooms and such, but it's also using correct pronouns and using correct names. And the litigation around this is just so interesting to me because now, like, we're seeing cases where I think there was a situation out of Virginia, I think that ACLU of Virginia maybe on that case, but teachers who are now using like free speech and First Amendment things to say like why they don't use a transgender person's or transgender name or pronoun, and it's just it's really exciting. And yeah, it brings a lot of heated issues at odds sometimes, and it's it can be difficult, I guess, for a lot of people to talk about. For me, it's just very, very, very straightforward. You know, if it's federally funded, you have to comply with federal law, and we know what federal law means. And also, it's just about being respectful. I just don't think it's that difficult to use someone's name. You know, if you're using people's nicknames. I mean, I see cases where schools refuse to, they won't use someone's correct name for graduation. So you're going to have to walk up on stage, you know, presenting as who you are, living as who you are, and then they're going to use what's referred to as like your dead name if you haven't legally changed your name, which is just so inappropriate. It's like, why would you do that? Or the same situation with like prom. You know, we just saw that situation in Gainesville, Georgia, where the superintendent intervened to have a transgender man removed from the prom king ballot. And now, like many schools, the resolution, apparently the school was actually, they were on the opposite side of the superintendent. So now the situation, now it's just a court. So there's no gender now. It's like potentially 2 women could win, 2 men could win, or a man and a woman could win. Which is good, because that opens it up to a lot of different people who don't identify within the binary as well. So that was a good result, but also I just feel like I wish that superintendent was punished more. You know, kind of got to get out of jail free card with that one. But yeah, a lot of situations where people just want to act horribly and they use just very baseless rationale for their discrimination. Symbols? Oh, Monica.
There's the trans flag up there, which, and there, on the bottom left corner, that symbol was created by a friend of mine who has recently passed away. It's a transgender symbol. Got male, the male, combination male, female, and then the combination symbol arrow on the left top. Same with the one in the upper right-hand corner. And then just different combinations of ones in the others as well. There are plenty of other symbols too. People do a lot of combination. I've seen the trans flag with the other symbol in the middle of it. And it's just whatever a person feels comfortable using, really. I created a flag for me. I didn't create thinking it was going to be an international icon. I said, okay, this is how I feel. This is my view for my being transgender. And so it apparently has caught on, so.
Yeah, big way.
And so these symbols are not necessarily created because they want people to use them. They're created because the individual likes this idea and they say, hey, I feel this is something that represents me. And so, but then other people catch on and use it. So, any questions on any of that? Yes.
Could you tell us some about the flag being donated to or given to the Smithsonian?
Say that again?
The flag being given to the Smithsonian Museum?
Oh, yes. Well, I had the original flag, and 2013, I was looking at all these pictures from prides all over the world, and I've seen the trans flag in a lot of these pictures, and I'm going, what is going on here? I'm still surprised this very day to see it in different places. It's been in every single continent, including Antarctica. It's been on top of almost all the highest peaks in the different continents. There's a trans woman who is working on going to the different peaks, and she's taking the flag with her. My goal would be to see the flag in the International Space Station. That would be fun. But when I started seeing the flag in all these different places, I said, oh my God, I got the original one, and I want to make sure that it's safe. So what I did was, well, I better start at the top, and I called the Smithsonian, and just so happens they were starting the LGBT wing, and so they said, yeah, but I had to definitely prove this was the first one, and I provided all kinds of information, and then they wanted to know about my past, so I had to provide information about being in the military, serving on submarines, and it was, they don't just take things and put them up. They want to know every single thing about the person who owns it is. And so finally, actually to the very day that I created the flag, August 19th, I donated it to the Smithsonian 15 years later. And so I consider August 19th Transgender Flag Day, in case anybody wants. And I think it was amazing. You know, I tell my mother, Mom, I have something to do with Smithsonian. I don't, you know, I'm still at awe about all this stuff, to be honest with you. It just amazes me that this has happened. And so I'm very happy that it has, but I get a little humbled sometimes, feeling, oh my gosh. You know, like people coming up to me and hugging me and going, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. I'm just a regular person.
Oh, there's so much more than that. I do have a question. Same lines of question. A lot of in Washington, a lot of the House Representatives and the senators, along with the American flag and their state flag, outside their office have the trans flag. What is your opinion on that?
Oh, well, a couple of things. First of all, the 31st of March is Transgender Visibility Day. And it's actually, I think, has turned into Transgender Visibility Week because a lot of things have been happening. So the National Center for Transgender Equality decided to see what would happen if they were to give flags to all the different Congress people, all of them, including Republicans. And sure enough, practically every one of them put the flag outside their office in support of Transgender Visibility Week. And then there was this controversy on Twitter that somebody saw Bernie Sanders' flag outside, and it still had the folds in it from when it was, packed. And people were saying, well, one person said, at least you could have done was steam it. And then it was like, all these different people came, why do this? And my thought was, worrying about whether it's steamed or not is kind of chicken shit, if you don't mind me saying. The fact that it's being displayed at all is a big deal. And whether it's wrinkled or not is, immaterial. I mean, the original flag is in a box in the Smithsonian. It's all wrinkled. So what the heck does it matter? The fact that they're out there is the important thing. The fact that these people are supporting us, showing their support. 20 years ago when I lobbied Congress, we were lucky to get in the office. We were lucky to, not be laughed at on the phone or harassed in the hallways. We were lucky that that didn't happen most of the time, but it did to some people. And now the trans flag is being flown outside the offices of all these Congress people. And I'm just amazed. I'm happy to see it happen. So how many of them are going to keep it up there after this week?
We also have to hold these people accountable. It's great to show a symbol, it's great to show a flag, but it's like people have to, act. I think that's another thing too. Oftentimes I get so tired of people, it's like words. So I think we also need to take a list of all the people, and then we can do a report card. Okay, and so that's the end of the PowerPoint, but there are some questions. So that was just some of the competency stuff, 101. If you all have questions about that, please ask. But then there were some questions, sort of a my story portion of this. So I'm going to open this up to the other panelists. I'll give you the 3 questions, and then you also talk about what you're comfortable with. When did you begin your transition, and could you talk us through your experience? What were some of the barriers you faced in your personal and professional relationships, and what were some barriers you faced changing legal documents?
I'm going to let Karen
answer.
He hasn't talked too much.
So I came out as trans on July 3rd, 2015. 1 month later, I started law school, so that was difficult to say the least. But when I first came out, I have a younger sister, she's 22 now. She was 200% supportive from the beginning, which is awesome. My mom, it took her a little while. I never doubted that she loved me, but I knew that it was going to be a struggle. But she's really come a long way, so I'm really proud of her. But as you can imagine, going into law school right after coming out as trans was difficult. I had to educate people immediately about what was respectful and what wasn't. And by and large, the law school community was really great. I mean, of course there were mishaps, but I never felt like anyone was malicious or anything like that. In fact, some of my law school friends would, especially before I started testosterone, would go with me to the bathroom to make sure I was okay, because it's not always safe to go to the bathroom as a trans person. Let's see. I started testosterone in March of 2016, so March of my 1L year. So I just, the March 25th. So I just had my 3rd year anniversary on testosterone. So that's pretty cool. And then I had top surgery in December of 2016, which means I was able to change my gender markers on documents. And backing up, in November of my 1L year, I legally changed my name. In fact, it was Dean Cox's husband who gave me the template on how to change it. So I just filled it out and took it to the Clark County Superior Court and changed my name. So that was cool. And I didn't have to go in front of a judge. That was nice. And the clerk, or, well, I don't know if it was the judge himself or his attorney or whatever, but when the court emailed me a copy of the name change, it was addressed to Mr. Harris Mason. So I thought that was really cool. I mean, law school was difficult in many ways. Obviously, the stresses of normal law school, and then being trans on top of that. But I have a lot of hope for the future based on how I was treated by my classmates, and how people are going to treat, or legal professionals are going to treat trans people in the future. And as my own personal act of resistance, on January 20th of 2018, that's when I actually changed my gender markers on everything but my birth certificate. My birth certificate is completely original. I don't think I want to change that because for me personally, it's the one legal document that says that I'm trans. And for me, I just think it's important. It's a part of my history. So at this point, I have no plans on changing my birth certificate. But yeah, I think one of the biggest reasons that I came out probably so late was I think there's so much more trans women visibility. So in my gap year, I lived in Atlanta, and that's when I met like my first trans person. And I spent a lot of time on YouTube, honestly, watching trans guy videos talk about their experience, and I'm like, okay, that seems like me. Next one, that sounds like me. Okay, next one. And, you know, being in Atlanta with a supportive community and finally seeing trans men and their experiences coming out, that definitely really helped me. And so I will, until the day I die, talk about how much visibility matters because it literally saves lives. And so I think that the more that we can get trans stories out, the spectrum of trans stories, the better. But that's about it.
You want to repeat the questions?
Oh, yeah. So, do you want to talk more about your experience coming out and transitioning? How has it impacted your personal and professional relationships? And, thought I had them all. One more. Any trouble changing your identity documents?
Okay. I just started my transition in 1997 in June. And however, I was coming to work at Sprint as Monica full-time since April of that year. And the issue as far as work goes was that the HR said that they would not tolerate any harassment, but harassment wasn't what I was going to be getting. Subtle bigotry was the big thing that I was going to get. Notes on my desk, notes put in my locker, because we had little slots to put things on. Some people tape the nasty notes. I worked in a call center, and I would sit down at a terminal, and some people would, on either side, would leave. One woman held the door open for several women to come through, and as soon as I got close, she let the door close on me. It was a lot of different things. It was a 3-story building that Sprint had. The second floor and the third floor and the first floor bathrooms were public access bathrooms, but they said I couldn't use the second floor bathroom. Well, being in a call center, I got a little extra time to go off off the phones. And then about a year and a half later, Sprint got the third floor for training. And I went to the HR person, I said, you know, what's going to happen is I'm allowed to go in that third floor bathroom, and as soon as training's done, all these women are going to go in there, and I'm going to go in right behind them. And she said, well, they're just going to have to know that they don't want you to be in there with you, they have to go to the second floor. So, sure enough, one training day happened, and I sat in the back of the room going, okay, let's see what's going to happen. And as soon as training was over, sure enough, all these women were going into the third floor bathroom, and I went in right behind them. Oh, some of them were upset. They left the bathroom. Some didn't go in when they saw me going in, and it was pretty much. I thought it was fun. and I said, okay, I'm going to get called to the HR, and this was a different HR person this time, so not one that helped me in the beginning. And she said, well, can we make a compromise on the third floor? And I said, no. And at this particular time, I've had some activism training and things, so I wasn't about to back down. And my supervisor even told her, you know, if Monica fights for the first or third floor bathroom, she's going to get the second floor bathroom too. And so sure enough, she told everybody that, hey, if you don't want to be on the third floor bathroom where Monica goes, then you can go down to the second floor. Because I had to go up to the third floor. So I felt that was a wonderful win. And a lot of things happened when I was working for Sprint. Before I transitioned, I even tried to get a union there, and that was pretty nasty because they are definitely anti-union. But I still stayed working there, and I ended up working at Sprint for 25 years, and transitioned 7.5 years into starting there. When I came to Atlanta, the HR person said, "Don't worry about it. Just use any bathroom that you need to use." And so I was treated just like any other woman. And there was a couple times where some women were a little nasty, but you know, most of the time everything was pretty good. So that's, I guess, my professional life. And would say personal life?
Personal and any ID document barriers.
Well, my mother and father were staunch Catholics, and in 1997 I had to tell my parents that I was going to move out for my wife, and I told my mother. She said, "Oh, gee, I wish you were just gay." And so, you know, interesting enough, 3 years later, after I decided I wasn't going to only date women, I called my mother up and said, "Mom, you got your wish. I am gay." And my father had diabetes and Alzheimer's, so she didn't want me to come to the house. And here is this house that I moved in with them in 1954 at this house, and I was no longer allowed to go to inside that house because she didn't want my father to see me. And so I left to Georgia, because I felt that if I was further away, it'd be easier. Being able to drive by my house where I grew up in was not fun. And 2004, my father was in a hospice. He was dying, and I called the hospice, and my sister put the phone up to his ear, and I said, "Dad, I love you." And he actually made a sound. My sister told me that was the only sound he made the entire time. Now, I was sitting in the airport here in Atlanta, and my son calls me and tells me that he had passed away. So I didn't get to go home in time to see him. My mother did say she wanted me to come home. And now I'm extremely close to my mother. She's 90 years old, soon to be 91. And she, and all my siblings, one brother, two sisters, everybody's okay with me. In fact, everybody, including in-laws and stuff. Living here with my wife, Darlene, she's 23 years younger than me. And her parents, like her mother's just 1 year older than me. So we get along real well. It was nice, it's nice to have a home here to go to, family. As far as the other thing, the last one?
ID documents. Any
Documents. I didn't have any trouble with documents in Arizona because of the way they had everything set up. However, when I got here, I knew that I was going to have some difficulty. And I didn't get my license changed for 1.5 years, and then I got pulled over. And he said, oh, you got to get your license changed. And yeah. So I was prepared. Being an activist, I looked up everything I needed to know, and I went in with all the paperwork and my name change form, and I had a document that showed where I lived and everything. And the way they had it listed, you had to have one document from this column here that's like a name change or some other passport, all these different things, and another one for your residence. And so I went in, and the guy looked over all my stuff, and then he went in the back, and then they called me into the back, and the guy in there said, this name change form doesn't show that you changed your gender. I said, no, it doesn't. It's a name change form. And they said, well, we need to have some proof that you had a gender change. And I said, look, I have one document from this column, like the law says, one document from this column, and everything else you want to know about me is on my Arizona driver's license. So they thought about it a little bit, and then they had me sit out in the hallway again for a little bit, and then he called me back in and said, okay, we called the main office. They said that we'll let it go. And the only issue I had was later on when they changed the documentation for driver's license, and I had to get mine renewed. You had all kinds of paperwork. And so I needed to show that I've had a gender change. And I used the document that the doctor gave me for changing my gender letter on passport. And that was just perfect. She accepted that as what was that I changed. So I still have the F1 driver's license in Georgia, even though, and I probably legally shouldn't. So that's my documentation story.
Well, I do want to see time for questions, so we're at 1:18. Well, does anyone have any questions? No. Well, I will keep it brief. Well, I think it's great. First of all, thank you all for sharing your stories. I think it's so important. Again, we don't, I think there's a level of vulnerability that it takes, but I think it just shows what a lot of trans people have to go through in their lives, literally just to be themselves. And we want the exact same things as everyone else, families, jobs, and just not to have to worry about being trans all the time. But for me, so I'm 28, and let's see, so 2008. So I'm from North Carolina, born and raised. western part of North Carolina, about 4 hours from Atlanta. And yeah, so 2008 was my first year of college. I went to UNC Chapel Hill, North Carolina. So fun times. I loved my time there. But I just knew, it's so funny because the summer before so I grew up in a very, I say redneck, I don't want to offend anybody, redneck part of North Carolina. My family, I'm the first and only to go to college and then on to law school. I'm biracial, I'm black and white, and so I just, growing up, like my dad just really wasn't in the picture. He was in prison for a good while, probably until I was a junior in college, I think. So I was like, I don't know what age that was, like maybe, I don't know, junior in college. And so, I just really wasn't able to, I knew how I felt inside, I didn't really have language for it. But as soon as I got to college, I was like, I'm gonna have a boyfriend, like all of these crazy things. Because at that time I had identified as gay because I thought that's just what it was. And I had told my mom, I had this big situation, I wrote her this long letter, she cried, she didn't talk to me for a while, and it was what it was. But then I get to college, and I was like, this isn't right. Like I joined like the gay club, or the LGBT club, I'm sorry, the LGBT club, and I made some gay guy friends, and I was doing everything that I thought was right. I was going to the bar nights, and I was like, oh, it still isn't right. And so then I just remember, 2009, December 2009, I had this huge breakdown. I got a full scholarship to Carolina, and I've always had extremely high standards for myself. And I was battling with such serious, at the time, I didn't know, but it was really bad gender dysphoria, which was like manifesting in really bad depression and anxiety. I was missing class, I wasn't, making the grades that I wanted. And I just had this breakdown, and I had to go to campus health, and it was just a really bad experience. And that was like when I finally I accepted who I was. It was what it was. I just remember sitting there and I was like, you're poor, I was like, you're brown, I was like, and now you want to do this, I was like, what the hell? But ultimately it was like, it's what I had to do to truly live as myself. And so from there, it was like, from that moment on, it was just like fire. It was like, there was no more asking people, it was like demanding. It was like, I had to get what I needed and what I deserved, that's just what it was. UNC was incredibly accommodating, probably the most local school in North Carolina, I would say. Maybe UNC Asheville, for a little while. UNC was extremely accommodating in terms of providing me with housing at the same price as just, they gave me housing by myself, which now sounds a little bit like separate but equal. Housing alone at the same price as, if I was in a double. Very accommodating in terms of, I had some grades removed off my transcript because obviously I was dealing with some very serious medical issues. From there on, I was just an advocate for myself. I was just doing things for the first time. There weren't really any openly trans people at UNC at the time that I was aware of. Housing, I was fighting with North Carolina Medicaid. I was on Medicaid for a while, or for all my life and then up until college, in terms of getting Medicaid coverage when I had started hormones. Back in North Carolina, it was wild. It was wild back then because I had to, which seems like it wasn't that long ago, it was like 2008, 2009, but I had to do a year of counseling. I had to have a family session. I had to go to a sperm bank to talk about saving sperm. Because one of the possible side effects of HRT is sterility, which is another thing that I'm extremely interested in. So what really got me into activism was healthcare, because healthcare is ultimately what I needed. I knew when I started my transition that surgery was my ultimate goal. That was what was going to help me live as who I was. Didn't know how it was going to happen, but I knew it was going to happen. And so I went all through college. I graduated, and I knew I wanted to go to law school. In terms of ID documents, I didn't change my ID documents until I moved to New York, just because it was much easier as compared to North Carolina. I had a lot of just weird experiences. Even though I had a full scholarship at UNC, I did have to work a lot. I had a lot of jobs. I worked at Sephora. I worked at a tanning salon. The tanning salon was at a gym, Buffalo Wild Wings, lots of jobs. And with the tanning salon, so this was, I just needed a job. I had to pay some bills. And so at that time, you know, I was living as Taylor. I had gotten to this mindset where I was just living as like, I just couldn't care if people knew or not. Like, I think as trans people just have to get out of that mindset. It's hard, it's definitely hard, but, you know, I was just like, I don't care how people perceive me. Like, I am who I am. That's just what it is. And so I was using Taylor, and I had not legally changed my name. So when I filled out my paperwork, I had done some research, and the IRS had like some basic guidelines that was like, as long as you use the right social security number and your last name, like your taxes will be fine. So I didn't see any tax implications. And so I couldn't imagine what the problem would be, just, you know, using a fake, well, like a fake name, as they ultimately said, on a job application. And so, yeah, I applied, I got the job. Tanning is a serious business. It's like science, okay? I had no idea. I had to take like this month-long course about the science of tanning. I was like, seriously? Like, you know, I know you couldn't see, like, I'm 4 years in. Like, I'm going to take a science course on tanning? And so I worked for like a whole month. It was fine. My coworker was great. I'll say another funny thing. So this was back in like the McCain-Palin situation. And I just remember coming to work and my boss had a McCain-Palin sticker and I was like, oh, like, this is going to go bad. And it went bad. So after a month, I finally got like my first paycheck, and you know the first paycheck, they give it to you, a physical check. And it was in Taylor. And that moment I realized I had messed up because I could not cash it at my bank because I didn't have, you know, the name wouldn't match. It didn't match my ID, so I couldn't go to Walmart or something and get it cashed. And I couldn't go to the bank that it was issued from either because, again, the ID situation. So I just assumed maybe they knew, I don't know. So I never was fine with it, which would have been the normal situation. You know, it didn't affect my job performance, so it was perfectly fine. So I go to my boss, tell them, fire the same day. And yeah, you know, of course I was even the little activist thing, you know, I was reporting them to the Better Business Bureau. Again, North Carolina laws weren't, I mean, if they would have had me as an attorney, we would have went after them, but a little bit before then. And so, yeah, that was probably, I think, the really only identity document situation, aside from just being misgendered, like being in traffic court. I think I talked about that a lot last year. Had many a traffic court situation where I had to go to traffic court and, you know, it's just a whole mass of people and they call you by your name, you have to stand up and people are looking at me and like, you know, they're calling me by my birth name. It's just very weird. But ultimately when I did move, so when it came time for law school, I was applying to law schools and I didn't know where I wanted to go. But I knew I wanted to be in New York, DC, or California. And so I moved to New York primarily for healthcare, and I got all my ID documents changed minus my birth certificate, which hasn't been a big deal to me. Law school was interesting, yeah, like I said, I came in guns blazing. I looked at my insurance plan, it had an exclusion, and I went to our dean and I explicitly told him, I was like, either, you all have to give me $3,000 or, we have to get rid of this exclusion. They were pretty supportive. I took Cigna on. I battled Cigna for a long time. Finally, I got coverage for everything I needed. New York had passed some great laws that ultimately aided in my winning that. I wrote many memos to Cigna explaining my disdain for them and how they were violating the law. And Cigna is still on my hit list. It's very hard to get at these big insurance companies, which is my ultimate goal, because I do believe they're the main perpetrators of this healthcare discrimination. Aside from states, a good friend of mine, Noah Lewis, he's at Transgender Legal Defense and Education Fund now. Prior to that, he was at his own firm, TRANScending Legal, where he was doing a lot of health insurance work. He sued the University of Georgia recently on behalf of Skylar Musgrove, a trans man who was employed by the University of Georgia. That case is still going, and he tried to sue Blue Cross Blue Shield of Georgia. And I went to the motion to dismiss hearing out in Athens. Judge Land, I don't know if any of you know, he's in the district court out there. And he let Blue Cross Blue Shield off the hook, unfortunately, for whatever reason. So these insurance companies have been particularly difficult to get at. Noah was using Title VII, which was, ultimately, it was kind of a stretch. I applaud new novel theories of liability. But yeah, and then the Affordable Care Act has an explicit sort of carve out for these third-party administrators. So they're really getting off the hook in a lot of different ways. But states are, again, being sued, and it's slowly getting better, I think. But fighting for my own healthcare was really what it just naturally translated into a good career in the law. It's something I'm extremely interested in, and again, just vital for trans people, especially trans kids. yeah, because ultimately a lot of us do need that healthcare to just move on with our lives and just be ourselves. And 128, 2 minutes. Any questions?
Does anyone have questions? Questions? Well, if everyone can have a round of applause. As they touched on, these are, can be really personal experiences. Kind of the onus is always on them to educate. So I'm really grateful that they came ready to do that for us today. But from this panel especially, I hope that you all will take that and go educate people yourself. That's something that I really would like to be a big takeaway from this. Trans people shouldn't have to do the work all the time. And so with that being said, we're going to take a 15-minute break. Next is our criminal justice panel. And after that will be our military panel. So if you want to go get food, use the bathroom, whatever. And thanks again to our panelists. All right, so we're going to get started with our second panel. Everyone got their food, So this next panel is going to be criminal justice promotion. After the last panel, I decided that it's a better idea to ask as we go. So if you have questions, raise your hand. We'll choose you. So without further ado, I'll let our panelists introduce themselves.
Everyone, I'm Taylor Brown from Lambda Legal. I'm a staff attorney there. I'm serving as a moderator on this panel, so I will be allowing these panelists to do a lot of great work in this area. Lambda Legal does have a criminal justice and police misconduct project. Unfortunately, less involved. Well, not less involved with these cases, but it just hasn't really. For some reason, our institutional resources haven't really been funneled towards that. I'm slowly changing that. I think we recently did an amicus brief in a case out of Florida called Cohane. This was about access to transition-related healthcare for a trans woman in the Florida Department of Corrections. But a lot of this work isn't really impact litigation focused. It's more so policy and just everyday treatment that transgender people face again while they're incarcerated.
Good afternoon. My name is Chanel Haley. I am the Gender Inclusion Organizer at Georgia Equality. Georgia Equality is a statewide LGBT education advocacy organization. We are, don't quote me, I think 23 years now? Yeah, I think 23 years. This is my 4th year there. I think it was like year 19 when I was hired. I'm the first trans person they ever hired. So there's something to be said about that for an organization around for 19 years. And getting around to hiring a trans person for that's an LGBT organization. What we do there is we also endorse and advocate for fair-minded candidates, people to run for office. And then on the C3 side, which is where my check comes from, the advocacy. And so I am at universities, businesses, schools, organizations around getting them to have inclusive policies for sexual orientation and identity. And that does also include law enforcement. So aside from my paid job, that I am also the former chair for the Human Relations Commission. So the city of Atlanta, up until December, was the only city in the state of Georgia that had a non-discrimination ordinance. And actually, very quickly, a little quick story about what I was hearing earlier from the stories is that I remember applying for a job in '99, low paying job at the grocery store, and getting hired at the job, and then they gave me my uniform, showed up to work in the uniform, they gave me a women's uniform. And my manager, though, said, you're not allowed to wear the women's uniform. And I got fired for that, okay, because of the uniform they gave me. I went and filed EEOC. The EEOC said nothing we can do about that. Nothing the city of Atlanta can do about that. At the end of that year, the city would like to pass that ordinance that I just talked about. And then again, full circle, in 2015, I was appointed chair of that board governing that. So I just wanted to point that out as to how things have changed in 10 years. Also, I am the secretary of the advisory committee to the United States Commission on Civil Rights for Georgia. And so right now, what we do is, everyone's heard of the United States Commission on Civil Rights, right? Certainly everyone here has, right? That's 64 Voting Rights Act, that's what that comes from. And then every state has what's called eyes and ears. So we pick out issues, we hold hearings, and then we write a report of that, and we send it back up to DC on what they should be advocating for, what legislation should be passed. So right now we're not doing, in Georgia, doing criminal justice. What we did right now was actually the Olmstead settlement, if anyone's familiar with that one, okay, on disability. And then I also have recently been appointed to the City of Atlanta's HOPWA modernization advisory committee. And so HOPWA is housing opportunities for people with AIDS or for HIV. And the budget's been cut. Atlanta, which represents 29 counties, or the money they represent is for 29 counties. And the budget was cut from $22.8 million down to $9 million. By 2020, and so the committee that I am on is about how we need to reallocate that money and coming up with a new formula of how people should be receiving that money, those funds. Oh, I'm sorry about that. I need to talk more about criminal justice. Just a second. I'm sorry. I'm a graduate of the Atlanta Police Citizens Academy, and so a lot of work that I do with them is their trainings and everything, and then I'm always brought into doing their with their new cadets. Every class I'm brought in to do scenarios with them so that they can be trained and learn how to deal with the trans community when they're out in the field.
So my name is Zahara. I am the executive director and co-founder of Transgender Barriers. We are a trans-led nonprofit organization that serves the transgender and gender non-conforming community. Am I talking about? Oh, okay. Great. So that serves the transgender and gender non-conforming community here in the state of Georgia. Most of our work is around reducing the harm to the criminal punishment system on TRANScending people. And a lot of that work is centered around that, and also understanding the underlying issue that leads to criminalization and addressing those issues as well. I sit on the board as the board president of Black and Pink. Black and Pink is a prison abolitionist organization. Prison abolitionist in the sense of alternatives to incarceration, such as restorative justice and transformative justice. So we do a lot of work with that and supporting LGBT people that are incarcerated. We have a newsletter that goes out to LGBT people that are incarcerated all over the nation, and we do a lot of great work. Also, I sit as the deputy director of Witness to Mass Incarceration. We are a nonprofit organization based in New York, but it's a national organization. One part of the work we're doing right now is we're working with the PRC, the Prior Resource Center, where we have a cohort of 10 LGBT formerly incarcerated individuals all over the nation, looking into the auditing process of PRIA and helping them with providing consultation of how to address the issues that are going on with the auditing process. So that's about most of what we're doing.
Well, that's kind of tough because I try and put folks in jail. You're trying to keep them out. So my name's Sergeant Lang. I'm a criminal investigator with the Houston County Sheriff's Office. I've been in law enforcement since 1997. Graduated from Auburn University in criminal justice, and then started with local sheriff's office in Harris County, which is over by Columbus. Then I switched agencies and worked Columbus Police Department for about 8 years. I'm in patrol, and then I ended up over here in Houston County in 2006 and been there ever since. So that's pretty much what I do, just with the Sheriff's Office. Just we work general cases. I mean, I've worked everything from homicides to theft of a bale of pine straw. So I mean, we get it kind of all. So
Well, Anna, the first question actually segues into your job and your experience in the healthcare situation. So if you want to talk about that and what it's like transitioning, being a law enforcement officer, and then also I think I find the healthcare stuff fascinating. So you can kind of talk about those things.
So I guess how I ended up here, I was married, and my son had just been born, and I noticed I finally confided in my wife in about '04. I was taking hormones kind of behind her back, just to try and figure this out. You know, a lot of the younger folks, Harris, you know, I waited till 30-something before I was able to figure it out, and, you know, computers really didn't get in, you know, for access for folks, I guess, my age until probably my late 20s. So I didn't have a lot of information to pull from. I mean, we still had to use, you know, Encyclopedia Britannica. Yeah,
That's
right.
copy.
So, and it's kind of like what he said, going online, you know, figuring, oh man, that's me, you know, that's me, and then just the realization, kind of like, oh no, that's me, you know. You know, this obviously isn't what I don't think anybody has, you know, asked for growing up. But so anyway, so I let her know, and at that time in law enforcement, and just me personally, maturity-wise, I didn't think I could handle transitioning in law enforcement. It's such a homophobic environment. I just didn't think I could do it. So my ex-wife, we're divorced now, but she's from Perry. So, but I knew I didn't want to be away from my son. So we moved here. Actually started with Geico, just getting in a corporate world. Thought it would be easier to transition, but and that place is rough. So I miss being in law enforcement. So I got hired by the sheriff's office and just kind of decided to delay transition. You know, I felt like a lot of guilt too. You know, I destroyed a marriage. You know, felt like my son deserved a father, and you know, that kind of thing. And it just got to the point for me where I just couldn't take it anymore. So I started taking hormones again in 2016. Realized that this was definitely the path that I needed to get to, or to be on. It just felt natural. So I notified my sheriff, who's 86 years old. He's been in office since 1973. And so that was not an easy conversation, because it's not really up on all the new terminology and so to speak. Now, I will say for somebody his age, he is very accepting as long as you do a good job. He might not understand it, or condones probably not the right word, but he's not going to you know, hurt me in any way as long as I'm doing my job. So, but then I had to tell all my coworkers, which was about 21 male cops, you know, all in a room, that I always felt I should have, you know, I felt I was a female, and felt that way ever since I was, you know, could remember. That was a scary conversation, you know, as many people have had, you know, scary conversations, but I made it through. And I think most of us on the panel, you hit a certain point where, what you said earlier, you just quit caring what people think. It's so hard to get to the point, I guess, where we're at, that nothing, you almost feel like you're superhuman, that nothing can stop you. So there's still some struggles with work, kind of microaggressions, but I just work my cases and do the best I can. Never had any issues with any victims I've had working any, you know, crimes. As long as I'm doing my job, then they seem okay with it. So how pretty much I got into, I guess, this arena is my policy. My county is self-insured. Now they use Blue Cross Blue Shield as a template plan for health insurance, and part of that template plan is the healthcare exclusion. But as I was reading my entire policy, there was one sentence in there under conformity of law that said that they would follow any and all federal laws. So I thought, hey, well, maybe here's my loophole. This is the loophole I was searching for. So I called Blue Cross and told them about the exclusion, and they told me I was covered. They didn't see it. So being, I guess, the pessimist, guarded, not, I didn't want to fly all the way to New York where my surgeon was. And so I had them call and verify, and they too were told that I was covered. So I booked a flight, took the day off, flew up to New York, got a surgery date of January 31st of this year, earlier, and got home, and then I got my denial letter in the mail from the insurance company. I'm on my second appeal now, but Blue Cross is saying that they're not responsible for any of that because my county is the one that chose to exclude this treatment, this medical treatment. So what's really cool with where my surgeon is they have an LGBT liaison for our community. So when I typed up my appeal, I sent it to him, and he got me in touch with Noah Lewis from Transgender Legal, and he contacted me and he said, I think I can help, because I really felt dead in the water. I mean, it's like fighting an uphill battle. I certainly in law enforcement, I don't have the money to hire attorneys. They don't work for free, and they're not cheap. So but he was my saving grace. At least he gave me hope. So I went before the county commissioners, I guess last month sometime, to ask for a change. They didn't even consider it. There's no reason really to deny it other than the one, which we all know. And so currently we're working on the EEOC case, to present that, and then once that's back, then we'll probably end up in litigation as well.
So obviously we have lots of different perspectives from the law enforcement and criminal justice community. And so the first question is about sort of the impact of the criminal justice system, or the disparate impact, I should say, of the criminal justice system on trans people. In particular, the statistic from the National Center for Transgender Equality. So they were the first organization to do sort of this comprehensive survey of transgender people and ask them about various aspects of their life, from employment to healthcare to family, and also about their interactions with the criminal justice system. And again, from earlier, we know that roughly 0.06, so 2% of that 0.06, which is actually a lot, has been incarcerated or in jail, a juvenile detention facility, and again, this is a vastly larger number as compared to the general population. So I'm going to let the panelists talk about the overrepresentation of trans people in the criminal justice system and the perspective from their work as to the causes of this.
Want to start?
Sure. So we actually conducted a survey as well with transgender barriers, and one of the places we visited were here in Macon, and we surveyed over 250 TRANScending people all over the state, and our findings found that over 59% of the respondents reported a history of incarceration. So this is something, as Taylor was saying, that disproportionate amount of TRANScending people are over-criminalized in the criminal justice system, and a lot of the issues come from having to survive in underground economy. Trans people are often ostracized from their family and friends and left to fend out for their own, and oftentimes this happens at a young age. So they are forced to get into underground economies, and then you have police officers and law enforcement officers that are targeting and criminalizing these individuals. And once they are incarcerated, they are released without any type of reentry services. Our report found that 95% of the respondents that have been incarcerated never received reentry services once they were released from incarceration, which led them on a cycle of incarceration, all to be stuck with a hole in the criminal justice system.
Zahara, can you explain underground economies? Just
Right, so underground economy is any kind of work to survive, whether it's sex work, whether it's shoplifting, or whatever work it is that's in an economy where it's criminalized simply because the law states so, but it's not affecting many people, but it's the only option that many trans people have.
Absolutely, I think that Zahara hit everything, all the bullet points around that. So let me paint a picture for you. Trans person living in Georgia, we'll do just Georgia. Even if they're in Atlanta, because Atlanta's not as big what people think it is, but anywhere part of Georgia, a person is living where it is absolutely legal to tell somebody that they cannot, they won't be hired because of sexual orientation or identity. So then they do get involved into the sub-economy. So whether that is sex work or selling drugs or shopping like Zahara said, because every living being has within them the fight to survive. And so they're just trying to survive. Also, let's talk about that when it comes to emergency housing is usually sex segregated. So they're usually denied access to that also. So, going into emergency housing where you're getting these services and this care is usually not something that is available to a trans person because they're usually denied access, even though it's federally should not be denied. And so all of that leads to, of course, being incarcerated because, police officers at their core is code enforcers. So there is a code that says this is against the law of you being out here loitering or soliciting for sex or anything like that, then they're supposed to arrest them. And then they're in the system. So now they're in the system, they've been incarcerated, now they have a record. There was no pre-arrest intervention before then. There was no information or anything given about the recidivism that would take place. And then there was no linkage to care, so there was nothing about trying to make sure that the person is getting any medications they need or any sustainable housing for when they get out. And so it becomes a cycle of going back in and going back in and going back in. So then there's also that when they're in there of what happens that will have the cause of trauma to get them to go back in again. Right, so there is a whole bunch of factors that come into play. You don't have the support system that some trans people, the very fortunate ones that do, whether the support system is family or it's friends or education is another one. Talking back, some of us are a little older. When I transitioned in 1998 to be a trans woman that transitioned in a university would not be allowed. So you talk about just not being respected on pronouns or a name by professor. The school, because there's a dress code policy, not allowed to be a trans person in a university. So there's several of trans people now that do not have the education to be able to afford to be able to keep the lifestyle or to just make the ends meet, so they would not have to be part of the sub-economy. So that was something that was extremely important around that. And of course, sexual assault takes place during this also. Domestic violence, intimate partner violence is a big one. Particularly, like I just said, when you don't have a support system, you latch on to whoever's giving you the attention that you need and you put up with certain things. And then I also want to point out about, because it's brought about youth. So, youth, and this is across the board LGBT youth period. They're either A, put out of their home and told to fend for themselves, or because of the way they're treated, they want to run away. And a lot of them get caught up into sex trafficking because of that. They have this idea, so if someone's down here in Macon or Valdosta or anywhere else in Georgia besides Atlanta, they think that, well, Atlanta's gonna be my savior. If I get to Atlanta, everything there is gay and happy and things will be great. But here's the thing, they have to get from there, where they're at, to Atlanta. And so what happens on that way there gets really dangerous. And then when they get to Atlanta will suck them up and spit them out 20 times in a week. Where they're couch surfing, they're having sex with older people just to be able to survive and eat. If you go up to Atlanta now, you will see, stay out in front of a club from just 24 hours. You will see and know who is underage and who isn't by who shows up, at a certain time. And then wait till the club closes, wait for the monitoring, open up monitors or public transportation to leave. If they don't get on that, then they'll get a ride with somebody else. But it is something that will suck you up, which is the reason why I should hope, which does not happen, is that at the what is it, post-training?
Right, and Standards and Training Council.
Right, but where you get all your training done at.
That's in Preside.
Yes.
Yeah.
What's the name of that?
Gypstick.
Gypstick,
Georgia Peace
Gypstick.
Officer.
They don't have any LGBT trainings there, so what, officers really do, and many of them do it, but not when it comes to our community around when they have that engagement with us, is trying to find out the resources to try to lock somebody up. Because once you're in the system, that's bad, right? And then again, you go down this rabbit hole of a cycle that will keep happening.
And that is, what they've touched on, it is true. Even with education, I was working security for a church, and Warner Robinson got fired when I came out. So I wasn't necessarily doing anything in the church, I was just directing traffic, getting folks in. So, lucky for me, I had something to fall back on, but if you're already struggling as it is, and then you get, they lose that, then yeah, once you're in the system, it's kind of tough. And especially if you drop out of school, or you can't even make it to school because your parents kick you out. I mean, you have to do what you have to do to survive. So it's definitely, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done that way.
Has your specific department dealt with any LGBT, because I'm assuming from a smaller town, there may not be a lot, especially trans folks, but LGBT people?
We do. It's kind of one of those, put your head in the sand. If it's, if you don't address it, it's not there. We have, gay couples in our community that we respond to domestics and that kind of stuff. And really and luckily for Houston is we treat everybody with respect for the most part, because if someone wants to complain to our sheriff, and he takes that very seriously, we're kind of, we're in trouble. So it's like, so we kind of go out of the way to be respectful of everybody.
What's the demographic makeup of your county?
It's mixed. I don't know the numbers. We have Warner Robins, which is the city, and we've got Perry, and then of course we cover everything else. So, it's a mix. Probably in Houston though, it's
predominantly white.
No, I would say so. Warner Robins is more African American community.
Do you think that the culture in Houston County has something to do with that people are there basically on the military base and have had experiences around the world?
I think that certainly helps. If the base dried up, Warner Robins would, dry up as well. So you do have a lot more open, worldly people living in Warner Robins because of that travel. And kind of, what some of the military is doing.
I'm not so sure that's okay. And I compared that to Columbus, who also, most of their police force is military, and of course the military base there. They are extremely conservative.
Well, I'm not saying they're liberal. I'm just saying that they've, for me, okay, coming out at Houston County, there's really nobody else. It was probably 3 years ago at the Public Safety Training Center, I didn't meet my first openly gay officer. And I've been in this for 22 years. So just as a profession as a whole, you're not getting that mix. Now, what I interpreted her question to be is that although they may hold conservative views, there's certainly folks in the military have been exposed to more of the different LGBT folks or different variations in society than, say, somebody that grew up in Perry or Elko, that has never left the county. That's kind of what I meant by that.
And I was just simply saying, I think that you're giving them too much credit, that maybe they respect you because of your body of work.
And that could be.
And, oh, go ahead.
I agree with both of y'all. I was a deputy sheriff for 15 years and open, out of the closet, and I commend you for having that courage to come out, because I know the mindset, the crime control mindset of law enforcement in general. but also the mindset that we can work together, and I'll have you 6, but that doesn't mean that we're friends on all points. So, and you don't agree. So I agree with both of y'all.
And that should be the standard. I mean, you know, ultimately you are being paid by taxpayers, and so you can have whatever views you would like. But when it comes in terms of serving your community and enforcing the law, it's like that should be applied equally to everyone. And of course, that's just not how it is. And another thing that I think sort of a broader implication from this conversation is what we criminalize. And you know, there's this whole constitutional argument to the idea that sex work should be, you know, that's an individual liberty. That's something that people should be able to engage in without fear of law enforcement, you know, arresting you and then putting you in the system. And again, I just want to emphasize again, you know, we have a wide variety of perspectives on the criminal justice system. From, you know, Zahara has worked with abolitionist movements, which believe in, you know, abolishing prisons, and extreme criminal justice reform, which I think is clearly necessary. And then we have people who, again, you know, we want criminal justice, but in a more fair and sort of equally applied manner. And so, ultimately, wherever you fall on the spectrum, I think it comes down to human rights. And fortunately, for trans people, especially trans women, especially Black trans women, their experiences in any kind of incarceration, from the city to county jail to federal prison, it's horrible. I mean, from forcibly shaving people's heads to repeated rapes by corrections officers, to being put in male facilities in general population, to be victims there, just to be treated horribly on all levels, just even in an interpersonal basis. And so there is a serious systemic problem with transphobia and racism, intimately tied to racism, in I think all areas of the criminal justice system, unfortunately. I honestly, you know, I have my own beliefs about criminal justice, and I think that informs some of the work that I do. But yeah, I do just want to make sure it's that said, that it is, and we have, you know, I think, like Anna, being on the police force, I think that's what it takes ultimately, no matter, you know, Anna has her beliefs in being a law enforcement officer and what have you, and I think that kind of representation and trans people being at the table and in these kinds of jobs, you know, it's different whenever you have to answer to a trans person. As compared to maybe someone cisgender, you all can trans bash and stuff. But when, you know, when it's a trans person that you're working with as your colleague, like you're almost in a sense forced to understand sort of their perspective and their life.
Can we ask, I'd like to know, is that something that you think is done, that they're more conscious of the decisions they make because you're on the force?
As far as who?
I mean, do you educate them on trans issues, or do you feel that burden, or do you want to, or?
Educate coworkers or the public?
The coworkers.
Because I think that will inform their policing of other people.
Yeah, I mean, we've had conversations, you know, I try to be respectful and not make work my platform for education, but if somebody comes to me with questions, which a lot of guys do privately, you know, they'll ask me certain questions, and absolutely it's an educational time. You know, I got with our jail administrator last week, you know, if we even had a trans policy in case somebody was incarcerated. Just kind of looking over the stuff for this presentation, I was like, I don't even know if we have a policy. So, and they're in the process of creating one. So, which is better than what they had, you know, a year ago. My lieutenant, when I first came out, he created a transgender employee policy. It was never approved, but at least, you know, they've made an effort. So yeah, they're aware, and they've had to become aware because they get it.
That's great. I brought the question up because there's difference between, you know, just being a token trans person in whatever space it is that you're in. And I'm saying this, I particularly know, like in Richmond County, when there's a consolidated county, so it's
Augusta, right?
It's Augusta Richmond Sheriff's Department, yes. Hey, I'm transitioning to the sheriff. Sheriff said, great, you know, now to make sure I do LGBT liaison. And, you know, just because they were transitioning, they got this new job, you know, doesn't pay anything, right? There is no business card, there's nothing that goes along with that. There's no policies that was changed. It's just to check a box off that says that, hey, we're inclusive now. So that's not okay, you know. That is not okay, because nothing in the department has changed whatsoever. Nothing has changed for the people that they're serving, the people on the force, and so that's not okay. So that's why that's the question, is if they actually are listening or even open to the idea of doing any kind of policy changes whatsoever. They try, they fail, you talking to your colleagues is much better than just saying, oh, we're all good. This force is great, we have a trans person here. That's completely not okay.
It's coming, it's slow, but
Yes.
it's coming.
Yes.
Yeah. And so around that, I kind of just touched on this, but Zahara, do you want to talk about housing of trans folks in Georgia and like PREA, in relation to PREA?
Yeah, so right now, I'm trying to work with the Fulton County Sheriff's Office. They are one of the largest county jails in the state of Georgia, so, which is Atlanta's being one of the largest population of trans people. So a lot of trans people are going in and out of that jail. So we're trying to work with them if they don't have any policies around housing transgender people, how officers should interact and respect transgender people. So we're currently trying to work on that with them. But here in the state penal system, there are a host of issues. So there are PREA standards that are in place, and those PREA standards are to protect individuals from sexual abuse and confinement. And a lot of the new standards are centered around transgender people, understanding that trans people are the most victimized individuals that are in confinement. So understanding that they need protections, extra protections, because they're more vulnerable to assault. And one of those things around housing is there's a PREA standard that says that trans people should be housed on a case-by-case basis. You shouldn't have a blanket policy on how to house trans individuals. But most places, all over the nation, there are some places that are actually in compliance to the standard. But most places, including the state of Georgia corrections institution, they are housing trans people based on their genitalia, and that's a complete violation of the PREA standards. And that's part of the work of making sure that we're holding them accountable for this violation, because they're putting our people at risk of being sexually abused in confinement. And a lot of times what you see around housing is that trans people are housed in solitary confinement, which is for the most part 24 hours a day in a cell, a very small cell, under the guise that they're being protected from other inmates in the facility, and they're housed there for many more years. And understanding that this is a psychological abusive practice, and the PREA standards have something around that as well, that you cannot automatically house trans people in protected custody and solitary confinement because they're trans. So a lot of places are in violation of this standard. We get many mail from individual trans people that are incarcerated. They're telling their stories of how they're being housed in solitary confinement, and we have to call these facilities and advocate and make sure that they're aware of the standards that are in place, and that if they are involving in this practice, that they're in complete violation of the standards. And a lot of times they do bring the issue, but this isn't something that is systemic. This is something that individual facilities are doing to be in compliance. But for overall, the state of Georgia, Georgia Department of Correction, they're not in compliance to the standards that are in place right now to protect trans people.
I'll say, to combat that, and this is a problem with the LGBT movement, but because the LGBT movement was primarily, even though it was started by trans women of color for the most part, it has sort of focused on non-minority issues, we'll say. And interactions with the criminal justice system is a big issue, not just for Black trans people, but Black people in general. And so what I found is that in a lot of organizations, there's just the people who are supposed to be advocating for LGBT people, LGBT organizations, there's a lack of sort of institutional knowledge in how to do prison litigation, because it is a niche form of the law, and because of the Prison Litigation Reform Act and a host of other things, it's very difficult for these cases to even get off the ground or to find representation. And so there's all of these exhaustion requirements that prisoners have to go through in order to even be able to access federal court. And if they don't, they can be procedurally barred. And again, they're being subjected to the worst things, horrible constitutional violations. And again, PREA doesn't necessarily have like a cause of action that it gives people for when those standards are violated. Some judges have found that, and I think that's logical. We have standards set in place. And so it's like, well, why have the standards? If they're violated, what's the remedy? But yeah, so it's a very, very tough situation to be in because you're in an organization, and like Zahara says, you get tons of letters. Like, and I can imagine what you all get because that's like what you're focused on. The letters that we get, like I've had to leave work because it's just so horrible to hear about their experiences and to be so helpless because people are just, it's almost, and like I hate to say that, but I'm gonna say it. I compare it to sort of like literally some of the same atrocities that the breakdown that happens when humans have control of other humans, like in concentration camps. It's the same situation. It's like people just feel like these people are like less human and that they can just degrade them and violate them and put them in jeopardy. And again, I again want to emphasize it's just not other inmates that are victimizing transgender people. It's the corrections officers themselves, which is a huge problem. And I think it speaks to a real problem with our country in terms of the sexualization of trans people and feeling like they can be sexually victimized or they're there to be sexually victimized.
The prison system itself is, the problem with it is it's really its own ecosystem. And it's so difficult to penetrate because even when you hear the warden or the governor or someone of administration say, well, here's all the rules we have in place, here's how you can get a tour and all those type of things. But when that spotlight moves, they go back to what they were doing and it's treating people like crap. A lot of our prisons here are run by corporations, and so they pay their jailers less money than somewhere else, and the jailers take it out on the prisoners. They are not getting paid well, and so they mistreat them. Not all of them. I don't want to put everybody in that box, but yeah, the treatment is just absolutely awful. And so I do commend Zahara because as in my job, I touch on a lot of different things because I really truly believe, and which is the fact that trans people are part of every single community, including being incarcerated, but dealing with the prison system is a full-time, 24/7 job of just trying to, get someone to respond to one complaint. A prisoner can write a complaint about something that's happened in the system, and then they just throw it away or don't respond to it. How many times does it take? Then they get their family member to call, and no one's answering their family member. Then that prisoner is now being punished because they complained, so now they're either being put in confinement or not be allowed to have visitors. So it's just something that is so difficult to penetrate there. And then people don't know too in Georgia, hopefully all y'all know, who are law students here, know that in Georgia, when it comes down to the death penalty, it's the Board of Parks Grove that has full authority. The governor has nothing to do, no say-so about, state executions. It is the part of the Grove Board. That's 5 people. That's 5 people that have ultimate power over someone, over life or death, and as a parole board. And so, can you imagine trying to then, save your relative, your loved one around death penalty and having to penetrate 3 people, at least 3 people, to sway these votes. 3 people that was a point about the governor, so they kind of have the same views, that is guarded, that is so hard to get to, who are paid quite well, by the way, to be on this board. It's just so difficult to just get through and to make any kind of impact whatsoever. And so again, it's great that Zahara and organization Transcending Barriers, as well as Freedom Around, but at least when they get out, there's some kind of net that is catching them because they've already been through so much trauma over the last years of incarceration.
I wanted to touch on something that Chanel said about the private prisons. If you see that seems to be a pattern, especially here in the state of Georgia, the last 4 prisons that were constructed were all private prisons, mostly ran by CCA. So there seems to be where correction is going. And what you see is a private prison that Chanel was saying, this is a corporation, so the people at the bottom are being paid the absolute less. So you see individuals are completely indifferent because they're like, this is a job, this isn't a career, this is a job, I'm being paid $10 an hour to look after the safety and security of this facility. And what you see is that most people are dealing with all of the atrocities that are going on more in private prisons than state-run facilities. So but this seems to be something that a lot of states are going in the direction of.
And I think part of that is, oh, sorry, yeah.
I know we touched a little bit, there's PREA, which is kind of, the blanket policy, whether or not it gets implemented. I want to just get back to real quick about, is it discretion with the training for police officers, is that kind of with each county or police force or anything? Like, is there anything that is kind of more like a blanket thing that requires them to have even just a couple of hours of like LGBTQ?
No, so that is something that I've been working on.
And that's what I was wondering.
Yeah, that is, well, that's something that I've been working on. So I don't think we have the time to really go into the history about with Atlanta Police Department. But out of that, there was a colleague in my office that used to be a Gwinnett County police officer. We had a conversation. He works for another organization now. But about this, and he explained to me about requirements and that they have 20 hours a year.
There's certain classes we required to take.
Training. And so I asked him, like, well, you mean there's zero training? He explained to me that he was on the force before he came out, that how homophobic they were, and he was trying to tell us, his, the sheriff, what do you call the top sheriff? Well, the sheriff. Yeah, the sheriff. The sheriff. The deputy trying to tell the sheriff, about him coming out. He's like, I don't hear anything. Just don't tell me something to dick. We're good. So it was that blatant about what their views were there. And so that's why I'm like, well, it seems to me, Atlanta, we're doing pretty good now. We have 2 LGBT liaisons on our force. This is our 6th one. There's a couple others around the state that have them, but none as inclusive as ours. We have a policy for dealing with the gay community. We have a policy for dealing with the trans community, and then there's even a policy around in the jail of how to treat someone. The city jail, not the county jail. Well, the county jail has one also. They do. It's not a nice one. It is throw them all on one floor. That's a policy. But my point I'm getting at was, so why don't they have this? The training. And learning that they were required to have 20 hours a year, I thought, well, great. Because I went through, you can go through, there was thousands and thousands of trainings that was available online or in person that they can get, but none of them were having anything to do with LGBT community whatsoever. And so that was my fight. I was really close to getting in there, but now that the GBI director has changed, because I have a connection with his son and stuff, and getting in there and stuff, and so there's my GBI's office was willing to go in, because in order for me to go into a training, I need to be with a post-certified instructor also. And so it's difficult to find a post-certified instructor that is willing to talk about that. They don't have to do anything but stay in the room. So that's where the issue comes in at, is trying to find somebody and then them approving the curriculum. And yeah, that's the problem. There just isn't anything, which is crazy, because there's thousands and thousands of trainings.
Right.
But not for LGBT.
And then for the most part, law enforcement doesn't really want to hear this anyway.
So that's why you would almost kind of want, even as a starting point, kind of like a blanket regulation that's kind of like mandates them to do something, and then, see how it works out if they actually, or if they implement it, or just kind of have something in place that at least maybe gets it in motion, So it's not just up to, having one trans officer, or having one person go into different, sheriff's offices, or whatever, and trying to get that training, it's kind of like starts in statewide and then.
And you got to realize though too that we're dealing with Georgia, so I mean we're way behind the curve anyway. And I don't know if we're going to touch on documents, but I'll get mine out of the way. So I changed my license, shows female on my document. I had the doctor letter. So license says female. I called post, which is that holds my certificate, or certificate, my authority to arrest people. And when I submitted that to get, if you pull up my profile online, it'll say Anna Lang, male. So I said, can I change that? And they said, and just kind of I guess, smart ass kind of way, nope, we go by your birth certificate. So So I'm still a male, considered a male until that changes. So, George is not going to be in a hurry to change this kind of stuff until they're really made by the courts. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, Tom, real quick, I know we're about to end. I agree with that. In training, number one, you don't get those 20 hours to decide what you do with your 20 hours. They have it slotted that you have to do mandatory things, and there's little room to deviate from that. But I will say, at least in my department, I worked in Gwinnett County Sheriff. That's where I was. They missed a huge opportunity when PREA did come out and every department had to go over it. Do you think they talked about how to treat transgender people? Do you think they talked about any personal aspect? Not one bit. What we learned was the law and what our facility was going to be required to do, and that is it. They skipped over everything else about when somebody is arrested and they are transgender, how do you treat them when they come into the jail? Where do they go after that? Everybody's running to a supervisor, and then that person is scrambling to find whatever policy they rolled out in a memo 8 months ago. So it's really difficult, and there has been a history of abuse in the Gwinnett County Jail.
Isn't one of the post training centers near in Gwinnett?
Gwinnett County Police hosted a lot
Okay.
of training, but a lot of times we came down to Gypstick.
Okay, I asked the question because, of course, Gwinnett is one of the largest prison jails in the country.
Right.
That's almost 1 million square miles, right?
No, the Gwinnett County Jail, I think right now is probably fluctuating between 2,000 and 3,000 people. It's the county jail, not the prison.
Yes. Oh, sorry. Yes, correct. Right. The prison is close to 1 million. Okay. Anyway, what I said that was is because it's Gwinnett County and how many people they house. I was thinking that for me, I try to look at it from the opposite side of what the opposition will see and how to make it the biggest impact. Is how I look at mostly everything. And even if Gwinnett County officers do not care about the trans community or gay community or black community, anything, the fact that if they can command X amount of other officers in front of them to where they look like they're the leaders of law enforcement for Georgia, that would have been a win for them. That's my point.
Yeah.
Is that. And so I'll tell you the reason why Atlanta would not do that is because no one will listen to Atlanta because Atlanta's too liberal. So it needs to be Houston County or it needs to be Gwinnett, it needs to be somewhere else because that's the problem is that when you get outside of Metro Atlanta, then no one's supposed to listen. My exact words from the sheriff around in Augusta, Richmond was, we will never be like Atlanta, they're too liberal for us. And so that's why they're not interested in those policies.
Yeah, it's something just hit me. So again, the focus of our work largely is access to healthcare, and when you think about it in the grand scheme of things, people are dealing with so much more aside from healthcare, but there are trans women in prison who are incarcerated, they're long-term, what have you, who do want access to transitional healthcare, which they should have access to. Your constitutional rights don't stop. Well, take that out. All of your constitutional rights don't stop just because you're incarcerated. And so from that perspective, that's sort of what we do, and we do that through the 8th Amendment. Like deprivation of healthcare has been found to be equal and equal punishment in a lot of circumstances, and there's actually good case law presently in the 11th Circuit for that for trans women. But I think we're at the end. This was awesome.
If anyone has questions, we have a couple minutes.
Okay.
I didn't introduce myself before. My name is Amber Jones, and I'm a 3L here, but the reason why I'm saying that is I'm from Macon-Bibb County, and we are a blue county. But the cool thing about our county is it is 50-50. Like, we're not just outright blue. And I work with a group of people that work with our sheriff, who I think is progressive, and we've worked with him on other sensitivity issues. He wants his people to be trained. But what I want to walk away from here today to take back to my friends that work in this community is whatever resource we need to get the information to him. Because what I truly believe is if you're saying a county needs to be a trailblazer, I don't think he's afraid to do that. And if I can leave today and include that in the things, like, I've been more educated today than ever, but for African Americans in this community, similar issues exist. And I don't want to be fighting a fight that I can, like if I can fight to fight, I'd like to be smarter and wiser and have a resource and be able to be inclusive with the changes that we're asking for. Does that make sense?
It makes sense to me. So what I recommend with that is some people are really sick of hearing this now, but I really recommend starting with education first. So for me, that's with humility. And I say humility, not competency, because you can take one little course about a community and then you become an expert. So that's offensive. So I do recommend humility training with the force. We can start with the administration first, the top level, and then work your way down. That way they can get to review it. There's a lot of protocols in law enforcement. People can check off on things. So that's a good way of starting there. Block off about at least 2 hours. Hopefully it's a good one. And then move from there throughout the course. And then from there also, you can kind of shape what the policy should look like for everyone, right? So on the 15th or 16th of next month, I'll be doing the DeKalb County Solicitor's Office. And that's because that office wanted to become in compliance, to become more inclusive. Then after that, we'll be doing the judges for DeKalb County, which I'm really happy about because certainly judges, so that way you can go over these cases in front of them. So they're educated on that, right? It's important to me about the education part. I think that's where the starting. Everything Taylor went over, them having that. Even at the end, I hope when you get your training that whoever does your training gives some handouts.
I think that's what she wants it. Like she wants to actually train.
Yeah.
I was going to say.
Well, that's part of the thing, the handouts, because even when you go through trainings and when you're in class and whatever it is, there will still be a situation that will arise, and if you have a cheat sheet.
Like she wants an organization, like you.
I thought she wanted. No, she's just talking.
And another thing I have, I'm in a group, it's called TCOPS, but it's all transgender law enforcement personnel. It's
national.
Yeah, it's nation and international. But so what a lot of places have, and I have access to it, and you just get with me later, but it's policies that other agencies use, not only for their officers, but on how to deal with the public. So,
I think having someone come in and lecture out is invaluable.
yeah, it's good too, but that way it gives you, at least some guidelines.
Or a lawsuit. Kidding.
Go ahead.
I guess this is more of just a point, just because we haven't talked about it yet, but, and we talked about a little bit about the sheriffs and the role that they have in criminal justice reform. We also need to be going after our district attorneys. When they are doing wrong, they're elected officials, let's vote them out and let's hold them accountable. Because they have huge discretion in what they charge and what they don't charge. And those people need to be taken to task, and that's all I'm going to say as a law clerk.
And solicitors.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, Amber kind of brought us to the last question that I had on here is like how, specifically can we advocate on behalf of this or actively work towards this? And so, Chanel, you kind of touched on it. You talked about TCOPS a little bit. I hope if you guys have time, we can come talk to you. Zahara, I just want to see if you could tell us how we can get involved in your organization or support y'all.
So part of the work that we do is around training jails and facilities. I meet with correction leaders all over the nation and provide training around treatment of trans people. So that's part of the work that we do already. Also, there's actually saying that the Bibb County, we're actually in contact with a deputy of the Bibb County that's transgender, and we were providing assistance to that individual. So I think Bibb County will be a great start of trying to make some of those changes.
And I'll say, don't try to force yourself in situations where you're not confident unless you don't know what you're doing, especially as a lawyer because you're doing malpractice. But another thing that I think sometimes it seems really defeating because you're like, how can I do this work? Like, it's something that I care about, I don't have a personal in, it's not something that really affects my day-to-day life. And so, you have to work within the scope of what you have. And so I think as lawyers, as young lawyers, as people who are becoming lawyers, you always have to think about sort of, I look at my work because again, I'm not on the ground, but as, intervening. You know, I'm trying to make sure that when kids are in schools, you know, they're not being discriminated against. They can go on and get their education, go to college, get a job. They don't have to worry, go into some economics and things like that. Or when they're actually on the job, they're not going to get fired just because they're you know, careless. So if you're going into employment law, if you're going, there's all these kinds of angles. Also with your bar associations, volunteer lawyers associations, a great program that I've seen in many states is giving expungements for free, pro bono, for people who do have eligible expungements on their criminal records, because that goes a long way in terms of when they are before that judge, and this judge is looking at recidivism and things like that, you can get those easily expunged if they're eligible. So just small things like that can actually make a difference.
All right, and with that is our third panel, or our second panel. We have a round of applause for like the first panel, I really hope that you guys will take away from this a lot to go educate your peers, and specifically some of the action items that we just talked about. I think it's always really important when we do these educational symposiums to give people kind of tangible work that they can take away from here and do. So with that being said, we're going to take a little break, I think like 10 minutes because we're just a little bit behind, and then we're going to get started with our military panel. So, all right, now we're getting started. This is our military panel. I'm very excited for, very topical, obviously. And once again, I will let our panelists introduce themselves.
Okay, my name's Monica Helms. I served 8 years in the Navy on submarines. I was nuclear trained, so I served back in the engine room. I worked close to the reactor, and this is what happened. And I come from a long line of military family. My grandfather was in the Navy. All of my uncles and one aunt served in World War II. My father also served in World War II. Plus, he served in 3 branches of the military and during 3 wars. My brother served 20 years in the Army. His son is currently in the Air Force. And my son did 4 years in the Marines and went to Iraq. So we have a long history in our family of serving this country. And when I transitioned, I realized I didn't have to stop being proud of being served in the military. That it was totally, they were not connected in any way. Because I was getting all kinds of harassment from other submariners when I was on a list that, you know, I shouldn't have been in submarines and all this stuff. Because women have not served on submarines until 2012. And now, oddly enough, we have a trans man who is a submariner. And I've known at least 40 different trans women who've served on submarines. It's a very interesting part of the military. It has a very long and strong history. During World War II, we lost 3,300 men and 52 submarines. And that was part of the military, the Navy, that was only 1% of the Navy military personnel. So I got on submarines simply because I wanted to try. I joined the Navy because I was dodging the draft. I had a low number, and I didn't want to go to Vietnam, and so I decided to go in the Navy, and then I picked submarines, and it was a very interesting thing. It definitely gave me a lot of independence. It taught me to use my voice as an activist, and it was there was many things that I'm very proud of to have been involved with. And so I will talk about certain things later, about like the Transgender American Veterans Association. So I'm going to let my colleague.
All right, so my name's Leah, and given the way I present, I guess it's important to go over this. I'm a trans woman, so she, her pronouns. I know I kind of present in a way that maybe most people don't expect from trans women. I am in the Air Force. I joined the Air Force in 2002. I'm 37, going to be 38 soon. So joined in 2002, was active duty for 3 years. As an intelligence analyst, I worked at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia. Loved it, more or less. I loved the experience, but I knew active duty was not for me, especially was dealing with gender dysphoria at that time. So I found an early out program to where I could get out and go to college. So I applied for the program, and finally, after a couple of times, they gave up and accepted me to the program. The catch was I had to double my remaining time as a reservist. So at that time, I had 1 year left on my enlistment. So transferred out to the reserves, and turned out I really liked being a reservist and stuck around. My reserve unit is here in Warner Robins. I was just saying earlier that I've been here, seems like forever. I got assigned to Warner Robins in June 2005, so been here a little while. Really loved the reserve experience. I've deployed to several very hot, very sandy locations. All in all, they were really good. I'm fortunate for the experience. But in my civilian life, I'm a park ranger for the National Park Service, and I live and work in the state of Michigan right now at Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lake Shore, where I'm a program manager for the Parks Interpretive Division. So I give a lot of programs to visitors. Mainly I talk a lot, because as you'll find out, I really like to talk. So I'm trying to think, what else can I tell you? That's about it. That's mostly, yeah, that's my introduction.
Great. Hi everyone, my name is Taylor Brown. I'm a staff attorney at Lambda Legal and also the Secretary of Defense. Kidding. Yeah. So no military experience, but I do have experience suing the military, so I think that counts. Yeah, so I'm at Lambda Legal in our Atlanta office. I'm not technically on our Karnofsky v. Trump team, but my main supervising attorney, she's the lead attorney on there, so I do a little bit of support work with her. And so this panel is primarily for Monica and Leah to talk about their experience, and then I can talk about some of our litigation efforts on behalf of trans veterans and service members. And so Monica, you kind of went into it a little bit, but sort of to what extent were you out when you were in the military, and what did that look like?
Well, I served from 1970 to 1978.
Okay. So
What that should answer the question.
Monica's not out at the time.
It was 1974 when I started realizing that I liked to dress as a woman. Of course, I didn't know what that was all about. One thing I did know was the military would not appreciate that if they found out. I remember being stationed on my second boat, and this was in Vallejo, California, and the sub just got out of dry dock, and we're doing sea trials. And since I wasn't qualified to stand any watches on that submarine at the time, I stayed in town, in barracks, and while everybody else went to sea. So I was in this 4-room barracks, and I figured, okay, the other 3 guys are at sea. They're the only other ones that have the key to this room. So I could put on a pantyhose and a bra. And as soon as I got the bra on, I hear this knock on the door. And I go, oh my gosh, well, I got the only other key. And then I hear a key going in the door. And I'm going, oh shit. And so I jumped into the rack, pulled my covers all the way up so they couldn't see the bra straps. And in walks the chief of the boat, which is the top enlisted person, and the executive officer. And the chief of the boat comes over to me and says, are you sleeping? And I said, oh yeah. He said, we go back to sleep, we're just looking around. And they just looked at a couple of things and left. So I dodged the bullet that time, definitely. That was one of the scary experiences that I had. I mean, I didn't realize, I mean, it was in the 80s when I thought I was a heterosexual crossdresser. And then it was in late 80s when I realized when Friend decided that she wanted to transition, that everything that she was saying was exactly right for me. So I knew in 1987 that I should transition. But I was married, I had 2 kids, yeah, they were young. And I waited till 1997, and my sons were 13 and 15 at the time. So I was a member of a national organization called the United States Submarine Veterans Incorporated. And the first bit of activism I've ever had to do was to renew my membership in this organization after I transitioned. And so they said, I told them, well, I need to make a change because something has happened since I originally came into the organization. And I told them that I wanted to re-up my membership with my new name and still remain active in the local club that was there at the time. And they were just, they couldn't believe it. And, oh my God, so for a month or so, we went back and forth, and they went to the national organization, and finally, they wanted me to join as an auxiliary member, which is what the wives were in. And I said no. And the bylaws for the organization said that 2 requirements. You had to be submarine qualified and have an honorable discharge. I had both. So they couldn't kick me out, and they couldn't not accept me. So they let me join back in as myself, and I became the first woman in this organization of all men, which had about 8,000 members at the time. And I'm not the only one that's joined it since then, but and it led to other things as far as the military goes. I was online with in the 2002, online with this trans veterans group, and they were talking about various stories about their issues that they've had with the VA. And one story hit me real big. It was a trans man who went to DC, and the VA in DC told him no, they weren't going to help him for anything. Then he drove 60 miles north to Baltimore, and they decided to help him. And I'm going, why is there an inconsistency in the VA that one place will take trans people, another place wouldn't? And kind of found out that this was the way it was throughout the VA. People in other parts of the country were being treated well, other people were treated poorly, and some weren't even being treated at all. And I said, this has got to stop. And my friend Angela Brightfeather and I created the Transgender American Veterans Association, 2003. I became the first president, and I served for 10 years in the organization. And 8.5 years after we started the organization, we got, with the help of other organizations, we got the VA to put out a policy that said how to treat transgender veterans. And a day after we got that policy out, we got emails from trans veterans saying it worked. We actually saved people's lives. And so I'm very happy about that. That's one of my proud moments. The other thing that the Transgender American Veterans did was in 2004, we went to DC, and we had what was called the Transgender March to the Wall. One of the things that we found out that trans veterans were afraid to go to the Vietnam Memorial as themselves. They were afraid to do this because they didn't want to be harassed or made fun of or anything. So we put together this trip, and 50 trans people, veterans, showed up, and we went and we toured different military memorials in DC. But I tell you, when we went to the wall, it was the most emotional time that you would ever see. Some people just cried because they finally got the chance to be at that wall as themselves. And some of them had friends on that wall that they lost. And then later that day, we went to Arlington National Cemetery, and 4 of our members were able to lay a wreath at the Tomb of the Unknown, the first time that was ever done. And when that happened, the sergeant of the guard came out and said, "This wreath is being presented by the Transgender American Veterans Association." And you can imagine how it felt to hear the word transgender being said on those hollow grounds. And there wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. Some of the most longtime activists were crying because of this. And people, civilian, other people that were not trans, realized how historical this moment was. So that was, we did it again the year after. And then last year, the organization did it again, but I wasn't part of it. And so I'm very happy at all the things that I've been able to help with veterans. And right now, the Transgender American Veterans Association is still going strong, and their focus is military service members and the ban against them that keeps popping up and keeps getting knocked down in the courts. And so we still have to be out there fighting. And part of the reason why these flags were put out at the congressional offices all over the Hill was that they were trying to show support for the military trans people as well as Trans Visibility Week. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Leah, your experience?
So as far as being out in the military, for the largest portion of my career, I was not out. Like I said, I joined, I signed my paperwork in September 2001 after 9/11. Didn't actually go to basic training until September the following year. So it wasn't until 2014 that I came out to people I was close to as being trans. And then I could see I had always kind of watched the status of how trans rights were going with relation to the military. And I could see kind of the winds of change were blowing, but I wanted to my original intent was, I'm just gonna sit here, I'm not gonna say anything until we can come out, and then I'll come out and start my transition. However, it got to the point where I just couldn't wait anymore. So in May 2015, I came out, and this was ahead of the repeal of the ban. So I came out by drafting a memorandum for record, because the military operates on paperwork. So I draft this memo, and it's going to go to my chain of command, and I thought, this is going to move pretty quick. They're going to kick me out. But I submitted my memo, and my boss at the time was really, really good. He saw it, and he essentially sat on it because he talked to other people, and they were like, hey, hang on to it. The Secretary of the Air Force has an announcement the start of next month. So, start of next month, the Secretary of the Air Force said they would stop kicking people out for coming out as trans. So, got to stay in, and then a month later, so July 2015, then Secretary of Defense Ash Carter said they would halt all kicking people out for being trans until they could review the policy. Now, it wasn't until 2016. It wasn't until 2016 that they started letting people start changing their gender marker. Some people were able to kind of get in and change their gender marker under kind of the disarray when the military had no clue what to do with any of us. So the military's policy, like if you went to admin and was like, hey, weird thing, I noticed my gender marker's wrong in the system. They would say, oh, our bad, give us your birth certificate. As long as your birth certificate, whatever that says, we'll make our system say the same thing. So if you lived in a state where you could change your birth certificate, you were in. And some people were able to do that. Myself, I'm a resident of the state of Tennessee. Tennessee won't even do the we hate you, but we'll amend your birth certificate so everybody can see. They just won't change it under any circumstance. So I was kind of screwed. So I was like, all right, well, whatever, I'll write it out. And so October 2016 rolls around, they're like, okay, you can now file your paperwork, get your gender marker changed, etc. I filed my paperwork, and for some people, the process has moved relatively fast or smoothly. For some of us, so my gender marker still hasn't changed. So that means for me, so bathroom facilities, changing facilities, physical fitness tests, it's all male standards, all male grooming standards too. I guess I'm somewhat fortunate considering the way I present, and I typically keep shorter hair anyway. So it's just been a real pain, military life-wise. But prior to coming out, I wasn't out. I knew I was trans for a long time. I kind of, the first time I ever heard the word transgender, I was at my grandparents and they had cable because we couldn't afford cable. And they were doing gender confirmation surgery. I was like, what? This is a thing? Like they can do that? So that's, and I started, like, okay, I'm gonna look this up on the internet. So I start looking at stuff on the internet, and now I'm active duty. And I went back and forth because I didn't experience or cope with gender dysphoria in the way a lot of my trans women peers typically do. So some people will do what you call cross-dressing to kind of cope with this. This was not something I did, and obviously, given the way I present, you can kind of see why. But I always went back and forth. I was kind of in this state of denial. I was like, okay, maybe this isn't me. Maybe I'm just jealous of women. Yeah, that's it. And I would kind of rationalize it away, and everything would be fine for a few months, and then I would find myself back in this like same position. I'm like, okay, yeah, no, this is me. But just all the things that you have to deal with. So like embarrassment, shame. You kind of like, well, you know, unless I can like disappear, like I guess I always thought, you know what? I'll just run off to California. California is this magical place, right? And I'll transition. I won't have to see anybody again. It'll be good. But obviously, life gets complicated. It doesn't quite work that way. So when I came out in 2014, I was married and came out to my wife at that time. Did not go well. And so I felt like in a lot of ways, like my relationship was falling apart. I was gonna lose my military job. So I had no idea what I was doing. Luckily, I had already gone to college and it was paid for. So I had, I guess, more of a chance than a lot of trans women or trans people in general are given, because I at least had my education, I had military experience, still had my reserve job for the time being, so even if I couldn't get work, they had to let me do my reserve days, so I was going to make some income at least. But even with all those advantages, it was still kind of difficult to find a job. Even having a degree, I got my degree in forestry, and had grad school as well, and still struggling to find a job, and ended up working at Starbucks. And now my phone is vibrating, sorry. So the whole experience, like, I can't imagine having to go through it again, not having all the advantages that I had. Especially, I find that I afforded a certain amount of privileges because of the way I present. And what I mean by that is, so a lot of people, like, they look at me and they're like, I know that person's queer, right? And some people are like, that person's trans. But still, even people who might not be open or accepting of trans people, they see me and they go, well, at least she's not wearing a dress, right? Because that seems to be what matters to them. So the fact that I just wear men's clothes, yeah, I had to deal with a lot less crap than a lot of people have to deal with. And the fact that, well, I'm white, and it's our society, it's the way it goes, unfortunately. So my experience, even though I've had a lot of problems here and there, I've lucked out. And even for my experience in the military. So the military varies widely on acceptance. So it's going to depend on your branch. It's going to depend on your job. So fortunately, I'm in the Air Force. So it was a little easier on me. The Air Force is a little more of an accepting environment. And I'm in intelligence. So I lucked out again. But even so, like, everyone has been really good with my transition, but I've been a reservist at that unit for a long time. And I find that when you come out in kind of what is typically like a hyper-masculine environment or field like the military, and then combine that with the way I present, the people that are in my environment that might have problems with trans people didn't seem to have a problem with me, but it's because when I came out, I have an established history with them, they know me, so just, I kind of struggle with this sometimes, especially when I first came out. I was like, oh, my unit's great, the military's great, the Air Force is great, you know, like, so accepting of trans people. And it took a while for me to kind of like really learn. It's like, no, I'm just dealing with the privilege of these people know me, they might not like trans people in general, but they're like, well, you don't wear dresses and I know you. So I'm given the benefit of the doubt. So sometimes in kind of those hyper-masculine environments, it's really hard to know where you really stand with these people. And it's also kind of hard to look past one's own privilege and see kind of like what the real situation is. How accepting is your environment, really? So I try to keep that in mind, especially as I meet other military members who are going through transition, that my experience is not theirs. We're all different, and especially it varies among the different branches. But yeah.
Great. So I'm going to talk briefly, sort of, as Monica was mentioning, now we're up to the trans military ban. So I guess I was going to try to do it sort of like on a timeline. So we know sort of about the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy and how that affected LGBT service members and the service members, because it was about people who were in active duty. And so during the Obama administration, then Secretary of Defense Carter, for probably good reasons, decided to conduct a review about the impacts of having transgender people in the military serving openly. And so by serving openly, I'm assuming that just means getting health care and appearing how they want to appear and being able to talk about it or what have you. Ultimately, the report indicated that the two things that they're talking about, fiscal impact and military preparedness, the impacts were going to be negligible in terms of what it was going to cost the military. So that was 2016, 2015 or 2016. 2015 was when that was the working group started. 2016 is when the report came out, and then the following year they were allowed to, or after that study concluded, they reversed their policy, and now trans people could. There was never like an official like regulatory sort of something that they could point to or any kind of statute or anything like that. It was just sort of a policy and practice of the military that you could be able to be trans. And now they reversed that policy. So trans people for the first time could be in the military. They could join the military as a trans person. They didn't have to hide that fact. And yes, they pursued many career. As you heard, I mean, there's various avenues that you can go into when you're in the military, from being a, you can be a military lawyer, what are they called, judge advocates?
Yep,
JAG, in every branch. You can be a doctor, you can be a nurse, you can be all kinds of things that you can do. And then, 2016, the best year in America's history. For some reason, July 2017, we get a series of tweets. And I love like reading these things, like verbatim. So
every time I read them, I hear his voice.
Yeah, I can't do the voice, but I'll try. So the United States, July 26, 2017. The United States government will not accept or allow transgender individuals to serve in any capacity in the U.S. military. Our military must be focused on decisive and overwhelming victory and cannot be burdened with the tremendous medical costs and disruption that transgender in the military would entail. Thank you.
That was BS.
July 27th. So August 27th, that was 2017, July 2017. August 2017, 4 lawsuits were filed against this in various courts across the country, including Maryland, the United States District Court for the District of Columbia. We filed our lawsuit in the United States District Court for the Western District of Washington. And there was also one filed in the Central District of California. For a variety of reasons, as you can imagine, this is unconstitutional. And so, sort of where we're at now. So I was trying to think of how I could spin this, because there's a lot of things that we can talk about in relation to the direction that our country is heading, and that includes sort of where we're at in the federal court system. Lambda Legal, our primary mode of operation is through impact litigation, and a lot of it is federal litigation. A large swath of the movement, I think what we're most known for was sort of the marriage work. And a lot of the marriage work, it was very piecemeal, and some of it did start out in state court. But again, a lot of our activism, especially for trans rights, has been in federal courts. And so, with the change of the federal judiciary, it's a more hostile place in a lot of ways. So you can think of the strategic reasons for why we were not filing in, Southern District of Georgia to challenge this ban, or all of those fun places. And so, we were kind of competing. We are all sister organizations. We all love each other. But ultimately, we all wanted to do right by the people that we're representing, because I think part of the movement for equality for transgender people is this idea that, we're everywhere. We're doctors, we're lawyers, we are working at the local vet, what have you, we're in the military, whatever branch, and it's just this idea that, just because you're transgender doesn't bar you from certain aspects of life. It's not this idea of transgender people wanting special rights to be in the military or something like that, but it's people who are healthy, who have productive lives, who are interested in that career field, want to go into that career field, and for some reason the government has decided that because you're transgender, that's barred. And so courts rightfully found issue with that. So I was trying to catch up on all those cases. So I'm quite familiar with our case, Karnofsky v. Trump. So again, that was in Washington. Wonderful case. I don't know how many nerds are arguing here, but if you do go to YouTube, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals has a YouTube channel, and I watch oral arguments for fun all the time. Yeah, it is. Well, that one actually didn't go so well for us, but our district court, it was pretty good. I say that to say, but yeah, you should definitely go watch that. We got a wonderful panel in the Ninth Circuit who ultimately, while we didn't think they were going to come down with a favorable decision, the government in that situation pulled their appeal and just went straight to the Supreme Court. We got to be the lucky, out of all 4 cases, we were the lucky case for the Supreme Court, and they were asking the Supreme Court to stay the preliminary injunction that we had won at the district court, and to also, just skip everything and go straight to the merits in that case. So good news, bad news, we lost our preliminary injunction, so that killed all the other preliminary injunctions that were won in all the other courts, so that's going to allow the ban to go into effect. The good news is, though, that they did not go to the merits of the case, so it is going to have to be litigated. And so now we are all back in district court having a good old time. These days, it's like literally fighting over discovery because the government doesn't want to turn over anything, which it's a shame. It's really a shame. And I would say, and you can go and see some of these recorded arguments because it is very clear when the judge is asking the government for any kind of rationale, especially in the early phases of the litigation. It just goes to show you that the government, they were just not prepared for this. They did not answer anything. They had no rationale. Whenever this ban was announced via Twitter, multiple branches of the military were contacted in terms of their heads. Nobody had news. The Pentagon didn't know. Nobody knew. And so we can only look at this as, what it is facially, and it's just discrimination. And sort of, I guess, maybe appealing to a certain swath of the country who, may misunderstand people or who don't know trans people. But we have, again, great people. In our case, I think, and in all the other cases, some of the other organizations who have filed suit include National Center for Lesbian Rights. They do a lot of great trans work, various ACLU local affiliates, and the national ACLU. So yeah, again, where we're at now, I think everyone right now is back in district court. Yeah, preliminary injunctions have been dissolved, so the ban will go into effect. In terms of what that looks like, the government is, you know, running around like crazy, issuing memos randomly, trying to really, it's like they, what is it called? What's that? Building the plane while you're flying or whatever. It's like, yeah, it's like you've announced it and you have no idea what you're going to.
We'll get a memo and then we'll get a memo about the memo.
Yeah. And so now they sort of seen the preview, because you know, whenever you're seeking a preliminary injunction, one of the standards that you have to meet is a likelihood of success on the merits. And so, you know, I mean, technically, I guess the courts consider a preliminary injunction a serious form of relief, because you're getting sort of what you want in the beginning versus having to litigate this all the way through. And yeah, I mean, so now it's gone, which again, it's like very traumatizing, but go ahead, sorry.
I have a question on the same topic. So I heard there were, so I'm not as well versed in the legal side of this. I like try to follow things to keep up because it's relevant to my life, but I get lost along the way. So I heard there were 4 injunctions, and the Supreme Court's decision like effectively like paved the way for the ban. But it was up in the air. Someone was contesting that one of the injunctions is still in place till March 29th. So it's that March, did I have that day right? That they have until the 29th to like, I don't know, like everybody had vacated their injunctions or something like that, but one of them has until the 29th or something. Because it wasn't covered under
I don't think
this?
that's right. I actually don't know.
Is
What I would-
Trump?
Yeah, and so what I think, sort of my understanding of that is that because this government has repeatedly changed sort of the rationale, because they're trying to, again, skirt the constitutional issues. And now they have changed it to not transgender people, but people with gender dysphoria, which, who is that? Which I think, I mean, obviously that's why they were successful. So this whole idea is that now it's that people with gender dysphoria can't openly serve. And
that explains the memo about the memo that we got.
Gender dysphoria is usually how a lot of trans people feel before they get to transition.
Exactly. And so
once they start living the life, then it's like, and it was for me.
Their arguments are based on this idea, though, that all transgender people live with gender dysphoria every single day. It's seriously crippling, and there's no way that they would ever be prepared to serve in the military.
So at first we get this memo. So okay, the Pentagon's like, we've got our policy. All right, here's the way it's going to go down. So April 12th, the ban's going to go in place. If you've gotten your diagnosis before April 12th, and you're already in, we won't kick you out. And we can think Mattis, former Secretary Mattis kind of drew up this plan because the president said, you're going to draw up this plan. And don't get me wrong, Mattis did some good things for trans people, but we're not the people that he liked. Mattis was not our friend, per se. So he said Mattis was somewhat opposed to it because he said, what's wrong about this is you said, okay, it's safe to come out. Haha, now we got you, now you're out of here. He said that violates the military's core values and ethics. So Mattis came up with this scheme that, okay, fine, if you came out because we said it was safe, we won't go back after you and kick you out. So we got another memo and it said, okay, fine, if you gender dysphoria, and then we're going to draw the line in the sand, which is April 12th. So if you've got your diagnosis before then, you're safe, so long as you can still do your job and meet the standards. But they're not bringing anyone else in. That there's some people in limbo, they don't know how they're gonna deal with people who are currently in ROTC. There's like, this is a terrible disaster.
Yeah, and the majority of trans people are going to have a gender dysphoria diagnosis or a GID, depending on how old they are, diagnosis on their medical records because, and this goes to a larger problem, but transgender people are forced to interact with the healthcare system in order to get services that they need, to get their identity documents changed. It's not just to get healthcare, to get services, and you have to be diagnosed. And I mean, we should also note that gender dysphoria now, gender identity disorder was sort of like when transgender people were pathologized. The American Psychiatric Association has recognized, that it's not, you're not inherently disordered because you're transgender. It's this idea that the effects of being transgender, having an incongruent gender identity and physical body, rightfully, or not right, actually, that's the wrong word, not rightfully, but obviously is going to cause a lot of mental health symptoms until you are able to access the care that's been proven to reduce gender dysphoria. And that means living consistently with who you are. And so that, again, is social transition, legal transition, medical transition. And so, again, gender dysphoria is a serious condition, no doubt, but also a easily treatable condition. And we have many providers who are getting better and better and better, even people within the military. And so, so now there is this scrambling to figure out, how can we narrowly tailor this discrimination to survive a constitutional challenge? And it's proving difficult, which is great. And I always want to remain hopeful, but it is very discouraging, I think, sometimes when you see the way that the federal judiciary is going, and some of the people who are being appointed to our courts who are literally deciding people's civil rights and ultimately their ability to live and function as Americans in this society.
It just seems like so often we focus on our elected officials, and I'm not saying our votes don't count or our elected officials aren't important, because they very much are. But the element that so many of us get confused about or get lost about is when it comes to the courts, Supreme Court appointments, and even not just Supreme Court appointments. These things matter, and this is the battleground where it's ultimately going to happen. If we're going to win a fight, it's going to be in the courts. And I've heard some people say, well, it's going to be okay, if you all get kicked out, it's going to be okay, we're going to win the election, you can come back. Well, the military doesn't exactly work that way. And people who got kicked out under Don't Ask, Don't Tell found this out as well. You get kicked out, and the military says, okay, policy change, our bad, hey, you can come back if you're now qualified. So there's all these physical fitness standards, and entry requirements are much more stringent than stay-in requirements. So once you're kicked out, to get back in, it's very difficult, especially meeting those entry requirements. Say, in my case, as a 37-year-old, or at that time I'll be like 39 years old, and trying to get back in, it would be very difficult, if not impossible. People we kick out now, their career's over. And you've got people who are trying to get in, or people who are in ROTC that have kind of pointed their life towards this direction, and they're all in. Maybe they're in an ROTC scholarship, but they're not they're in this ambiguous territory where if they're trans, maybe they're openly out trans in ROTC, they can't jump the system, get in, get their gender identity disorder diagnosis, because it has to come from a military doctor. And they're stuck in the system. They're just going to keep going. The ban will go into place. They'll lose their ROTC scholarship, and they may not even complete college. it goes beyond just what we see, like the people that are in. And at last count in February 1st, there were 1,071 currently out trans people in the military. Doesn't seem like a large number, but that's a lot of people. Since the policy has gone in place, there's just about 1,500 trans people have come out in the military. And some of us have still lost our jobs. So if you come out and the military doctor that you're talking to get your gender identity disorder diagnosis says your depression's too bad, you may need to miss X number of months of work while we you may not be cleared to deploy in this time, and it's longer than they like, they'll kick you out anyway, even though there's no ban yet. So it's still very difficult. The court system is what we have to depend on to save us, and lawyers.
We try. And again, I just want to, and it's just not even just about enlisted folks and people who want to enlist, but also just veterans in general. We're just perpetuating stigmas about transgender people and people who have fought for this country, who died for this country. And yeah, it's extremely sad. And yeah, like you're saying, you're putting a lot of people in limbo who, and it's not just about deployable positions. These are non-deployable positions. People who, don't necessarily, they're not going to be, on the front lines. To say that they can't serve in any capacity in the military.
We have served since the Revolutionary War. I did a lot of research in that. Well, mostly it was women dressing as men to serve. There were some of these women actually lived as men afterwards. Civil War had over 400 known trans women who fought in the Civil War. And there were some of them at Andersonville that were in prison there. It's amazing that we have all these people throughout our history proven that they could serve well as the opposite gender in a different gender role. And we've proven that these people can do well. And the first known out trans person in the 20th century was Christine Jorgensen. Lily Elba was earlier, but she was not that known. Christine Jorgensen was a World War II veteran. So we have a lot of trans people that served well and proven that we can do it. And now we have people like her serving, proving that they can still do it.
It's not a new struggle for the military. It's a very complex situation, and especially with everything now having an administration, let's say, that oftentimes behaves erratically in a system that functions on written rules, guidelines, and policies. It's very hard for them to keep up. And they still don't have a clear answer for a lot of the problems they're running into. In 2016, the Pentagon formed a panel of trans people, which I was fortunate enough to serve on, and they sent us to the Pentagon, and they're like, okay, so we have to come up with policies of how trans people are going to serve, and we have to do it fast before the administration changes over. So here's the panel, let's write some rules. And they put a book in front of us, and they're like, this is what we've got so far. And everything keeps changing. And oftentimes, other people, you go to someone for some sort of services. So like my issue with getting my gender marker changed. So I didn't go through kind of the normal process of being a pseudo-civilian since I'm a reservist. I saw my own medical treatment. After going to therapy, I went in the route of informed consent to start my medical transition in 2015. And so now that's created problems for me. They're like, oh, you didn't get your gender identity diagnosis first, and they won't change my gender marker. However, the military went to issue me a passport for when I travel overseas for deployments, and the Department of State sent back a passport with a female gender marker on it because I changed my gender marker on my passport, like, I don't know, like 2 months into my medical transition.
It was easy to do that. Yeah.
So when they sent me my military passport as a female gender marker, and they're like, we don't know what to do. And it's like, I don't know how to change my gender marker, how about that? But, so everything is still erratic, and it keeps changing at a pace that nobody can really get a handle on. And
Okay, so it looks like we're out of time. Two things that I do want to end on. So I pulled up the Joe case just to see what was going on. So it looks like the DC Circuit has not issued its mandate to stay the preliminary injunction. They have until tomorrow to do it, and it's also going to give time for the plaintiffs to seek a review by the full court. But again, given what the Supreme Court just did in our case, it's not looking good.
you play the odds, and that's not where they are.
And the last point is that we are launching a Tennessee birth certificate case in a couple of weeks. So yeah, you need to still have time to be a plaintiff. Okay, but I think that's it. Thank y'all, and again, thank you for your service. I know that's so often said, but I think it's so important, and for what you all represent for the trans community and our abilities to be in all areas of life and all facets of life.
Thank you everyone that came to any or all of these panels. I am so excited for this. I hope you all really enjoyed it. We give another hand for our final panel. Thank you to our exec board and our committee and everyone that helped us publicize this and everyone that was subject to us blasting this flyer in event for the past month. And other than that, shameless plug, Project Quality meeting, our last one of the year, this semester is April 8th. And Judge Jacobs is coming to speak with us. Otherwise, thank you everyone.